The 14th and 13th centuries BC witnessed the Mediterranean world at its Bronze Age apex, with interconnected civilizations reaching unprecedented levels of sophistication, wealth, and territorial control. This period, spanning roughly from 1400 to 1200 BC, represented the culmination of nearly a millennium of gradual development in metallurgy, warfare, administration, and maritime technology. Three great powers dominated this landscape: the Hittite Empire controlling much of Anatolia and northern Syria, Mycenaean Greece commanding the Aegean and its trade routes, and New Kingdom Egypt extending its influence from Nubia to the Euphrates. The Hittite Empire under kings like Suppiluliuma I and Muwatalli II had transformed from a regional Anatolian kingdom into a superpower capable of challenging Egyptian hegemony in the Levant. From their capital at Hattusa, the Hittites administered a complex feudal system that incorporated numerous vassal states while maintaining direct control over strategic territories. The city itself sprawled across 180 hectares, protected by massive stone walls reinforced with towers and featuring elaborate gate structures decorated with carved lions and warriors. Archaeological excavations have revealed a sophisticated urban centre with separate districts for the royal citadel, temples, and administrative buildings, connected by paved streets and supplied by an advanced water management system, including underground channels and reservoirs. Hittite military organisation reflected their imperial ambitions and territorial extent. The core of their army consisted of professional warriors equipped with bronze weapons, supported by contingents from vassal states and allied territories. Hittite chariot forces represented the pinnacle of Bronze Age mobile warfare, with vehicles constructed using advanced techniques that balance speed, durability, and combat effectiveness. These chariots featured lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for maneuverability, and were typically crewed by two warriors, a driver, and an archer or spearman. Infantry formations included both heavy and light troops, with the former carrying bronze-tipped spears, rectangular shields, and wearing bronze-scale armour, while the latter served as skirmishers and archers. The Hittite legal and administrative system, preserved in thousands of cuneiform tablets from Hattusa, reveals a highly organised state apparatus. The king served as both supreme military commander and high priest, supported by a hierarchy of nobles, provincial governors, and local administrators. Treaties with vassal states followed standardised formats that outlined mutual obligations, tribute requirements, and military assistance clauses. The Hittites maintained diplomatic correspondence with other major powers, including Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, using Akkadian as the lingua franca of international relations. Mycenaean Greece during this period encompassed not only the Greek mainland, but also extended its influence across the Aegean islands, coastal Anatolia, and parts of the eastern Mediterranean. The Mycenaean political system centred on fortified palace complexes that served as administrative, religious, and economic centres for surrounding territories. Pylos, under the one-axe Nestor, controlled the southwestern Peloponnese from a palace complex that housed extensive archives written in Linear B script. These administrative records detail a sophisticated bureaucracy that managed land tenure, taxation, religious offerings, and craft production with remarkable precision. The palace at Pylos covered approximately 2 hectares and featured a distinctive Megaron hall with a central hearth surrounded by 4 columns supporting a clerestory roof. Frescoes depicting processions, hunting scenes, and mythological subjects decorated the walls, while floors were covered with painted plaster in geometric and naturalistic patterns. Storage areas contained hundreds of stirrup jars for oil and wine, bronze vessels, ivory objects, and weapons, indicating both local production and extensive trade connections. The palace's administrative wing housed archives containing over 1,000 Linear B tablets that recorded everything from livestock inventories to religious festival preparations. Tiryns, another major Mycenaean centre, demonstrated the military engineering capabilities of late Bronze Age Greece. The citadel's cyclopean walls, constructed from massive limestone blocks weighing several tons each, reached heights of up to 8 metres and enclosed an area of approximately 20,000 square metres. These fortifications incorporated sophisticated defensive features, including corbelled galleries, sally ports, and a complex entrance system designed to channel attackers through multiple choke points. The palace within featured similar architectural elements to Pylos, but on a grander scale, with a megaron measuring 11.8 by 9.9 metres and elaborate bathroom facilities including a terracotta bathtub. Mycenaean military organisation combined elements borrowed from Minoan Crete with innovations adapted to mainland Greek conditions. Chariot warfare played a significant role, though Mycenaean chariots differed from their Near Eastern counterparts in construction and tactical employment. Archaeological evidence from shaft graves and Tholos tombs reveals bronze weapons of exceptional quality, including rapiers, daggers, spearheads, and arrowheads. Body armour included bronze cuirasses, helmets reinforced with the boar tusks, and figure-eight shields made from oxhide stretched over wooden frames. The Mycenaean maritime network extended throughout the eastern Mediterranean, with evidence of Greek traders and settlers found in sites across Cyprus, the Levantine coast, and southern Italy. Mycenaean pottery, particularly stirrup jars and kylixes, appears in archaeological contexts from Sardinia to the Euphrates, indicating both the extent and intensity of their commercial activities. These trade relationships involve not only finished goods but also raw materials, with copper from Cyprus, tin from sources possibly in Anatolia or Central Europe, gold from Egypt and Nubia, and amber from the Baltic region. New Kingdom Egypt during the reigns of Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, and Ramesses. Second, represented the culmination of pharaonic power and territorial expansion. The Egyptian Empire stretched from the fourth cataract of the Nile in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria, encompassing a diverse array of peoples, resources, and strategic positions. This vast territory required sophisticated administrative systems that balanced central control with local autonomy, military forces capable of defending extended frontiers, and economic mechanisms that could extract and redistribute resources across thousands of kilometres. The Egyptian military during this period had evolved far beyond its Middle Kingdom origins to become a professional force equipped with the latest Bronze Age technology. Chariot corps formed the elite striking arm, with vehicles manufactured in royal workshops using imported wood, bronze fittings and leather components. Egyptian chariots typically carried 2 crew members, a driver and an archer, and were organised into squadrons of 10 vehicles under the command of the experienced officers. Infantry divisions, each theoretically containing 5,000 men, were recruited both from Egyptian populations and foreign auxiliaries, including Nubians, Libyans, and various Asiatic peoples. Egyptian bronzeworking had reached extraordinary levels of sophistication, producing weapons and tools that combined functional effectiveness with artistic excellence. Bronze swords found in royal tombs display complex metallurgical techniques, including pattern welding, differential hardening, and decorative inlays. Military equipment included composite bows capable of penetrating bronze armour at ranges exceeding 200 metres, bronze-tipped arrows with specialised heads for different targets, and siege equipment adapted from Asiatic models. The economic foundation of Egyptian power rested on the agricultural productivity of the Nile Valley, supplemented by tribute from conquered territories and profits from extensive trade networks. Egyptian merchants and diplomats maintained commercial relationships throughout the eastern Mediterranean, with Egyptian gold serving as a standard medium of exchange in international transactions. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign rulers reveal the complexity of these relationships and the central role of gift exchange in maintaining political alliances. Cyprus emerged during this period as a crucial intermediary in Mediterranean trade, particularly in copper production and distribution. The island's abundant copper deposits, concentrated in the Troodos Mountains, supplied raw material for bronze production throughout the region. Major centres like Enkomi and Kitian developed into sophisticated urban settlements with planned street layouts, substantial buildings, and evidence of specialised craft production. Cypriot copper ingots, shaped like ox hides and weighing approximately 25-30 kilograms each, have been found in shipwrecks and archaeological sites from Sardinia to the Black Sea, demonstrating the extent of the island's commercial influence. The Levantine coast during the Late Bronze Age featured numerous prosperous city-states that served as intermediaries between the great powers and conduits for long-distance trade. Ugarit, located on the Syrian coast, exemplified this role through its cosmopolitan character and extensive commercial networks. The city's archives, written in multiple languages and scripts including Ugaritic, Akkadian, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Hittite cuneiform, reflect its position as a meeting point of civilizations. Ugaritic merchants maintained trading houses in Cyprus, Egypt, and the Aegean, while the city's port handled goods ranging from Baltic amber to Indian ocean pearls. Ugarit's urban layout demonstrated advanced planning principles with distinct residential, commercial, and religious quarters connected by stone-paved streets. The royal palace covered over 6,000 square metres and contained more than 90 rooms, including throne rooms, private apartments, administrative offices, and storage facilities. The city's religious complex included temples dedicated to Baal, Dagon, and other deities, with elaborate ritual installations and rich votive deposits. Private houses, particularly in the wealthy residential district, featured multiple stories, interior courtyards, and sophisticated drainage systems. The technological achievements of this period extended beyond military applications to encompass advances in metallurgy, engineering, and maritime technology. Bronze working techniques had evolved to produce alloys with specific properties for different applications, from hard cutting edges for weapons and tools to corrosion-resistant fittings for ships and architectural elements. Foundries at sites like Kishon in Cyprus and Enkomi produced standardized copper ingots using advanced smelting techniques that maximized yield while minimizing fuel consumption. Shipbuilding technology had advanced to enable regular maritime commerce across the Mediterranean. The Uluburun shipwreck, dating to around 1300 BC, provides detailed evidence of Late Bronze Age maritime capabilities. The vessel, approximately 15 metres in length, carried a cargo weighing over 20 tons that included copper and tin ingots, glass ingots, ivory, ebony, ostrich eggshells, and various manufactured goods from across the known world. The ship's construction featured cedar planking joined with mortise and tenon joints, reinforced with bronze fastenings and sealed with pine resin. Agricultural intensification supported the population growth and urbanization characteristic of this period. Terracing systems in the Aegean Islands, irrigation networks in the Near East, and flood management systems along the Nile enabled increased food production that freed labour for specialised crafts, military service and administrative functions. Storage facilities at palace centres could hold supplies sufficient for several years, providing security against harvest failures and enabling rulers to support large retinues of dependents. The archaeological record from this period reveals unprecedented levels of material prosperity and cultural sophistication. Luxury goods including gold jewellery, ivory carvings, decorated textiles, and elaborate furniture appear in elite contexts throughout the Mediterranean. Artistic styles showed increasing international influence, with Egyptian motifs appearing in Mycenaean frescoes, Aegean pottery forms adopted in the Levant, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals found in Greek contexts. Religious practices during the Late Bronze Age reflected both local traditions and international influences. Temple complexes at major centres featured elaborate ritual installations, substantial treasuries, and extensive land holdings that made them significant economic as well as religious institutions. The international character of Late Bronze Age religion is evident in the adoption of foreign deities, syncretistic practices, and the exchange of religious texts and iconography between different cultural regions. Yet beneath the veneer of prosperity and international cooperation that characterized the Late Bronze Age Mediterranean, subtle signs of instability began manifesting during the final decades of the 13th century BC. These initial warnings, scattered across different regions and preserved in fragmentary records, would prove to be the harbingers of a catastrophic collapse that would reshape the ancient world. The first documented evidence of trouble appears in Hittite royal archives, where references to conflicts with Western and Anatolian peoples become increasingly frequent and urgent after 1250 BC. The Hittite king Tudhaliya IV faced mounting pressure along his empire's western frontiers, where a confederation of Anatolian peoples known collectively as the Asuwa lands had begun challenging imperial authority. These territories, stretching along the Aegean coast of Anatolia from the Troad in the north to Lycia in the south, had previously served as loyal vassals providing tribute and military assistance to Hattusa. However, archaeological evidence from sites like Troy, Miletos and Iassos reveals increasing fortification efforts during this period, suggesting growing insecurity and preparation for conflict. Hittite military records describe campaigns against rebellious Western vassals with unprecedented detail, indicating the seriousness of these threats. The Yulba inscription, carved on a rock relief near modern Konya, commemorates Tudhaliya's victories over the Luka people and their allies, describing pitched battles involving thousands of warriors and the capture of numerous fortified settlements. The text mentions specific tactical formations, siege techniques, and the deployment of chariot squadrons in mountainous terrain previously considered unsuitable for such operations. These Western Anatolian conflicts differed significantly from earlier Hittite military campaigns in their intensity and geographical scope. Previous rebellions had typically involved single city-states or small regional coalitions, but the late 13th century disturbances encompassed vast territories and involved coordinated resistance across multiple ethnic groups. Hittite administrative documents from this period reveal emergency measures including the mobilization of reserve forces, the construction of new fortifications along vulnerable frontiers, and the establishment of military colonies in strategic locations. Archaeological excavations at Hittite frontier sites provide material evidence of this increased militarization. The fortress of Kurukutepe on the Euphrates shows extensive renovation during the late 13th century, with existing walls heightened and reinforced, new towers added at regular intervals, and internal structures modified to accommodate larger garrisons. Similar patterns appear at sites throughout western and southern Anatolia, suggesting a coordinated imperial response to mounting external pressures. The situation in western Anatolia culminated in the destruction of Troy VIIa around 1180 BC, an event that has captured scholarly attention for over a century. This settlement, built on the ruins of the earlier Troy VI city, represented a significant urban centre controlling the strategic Dardanelles passage between Europe and Asia. The archaeological evidence from Troy VIIa reveals a community under siege, with narrow streets packed with storage jars, makeshift shelters constructed within the citadel walls, and clear signs of overcrowding as the population sought protection behind the massive fortifications. The destruction layer at Troy VIIa contains extensive fire damage, collapsed building materials, and scattered human remains that suggest violent conquest rather than accidental conflagration. Arrowheads of various types, including some with distinctive barbed points not typical of local Anatolian traditions, lie embedded in walls and scattered across floors. Bronze weapons and tools show evidence of hasty abandonment, with valuable items left behind in circumstances that suggest their owners fled or perished during the attack. Carl Blegen's excavations in the 1930s and subsequent investigations by Manfred Kaufmann's team reveal that Troy VIIa had been rebuilt hastily after the destruction of Troy VIII around 1300 BC. The new settlement utilised existing fortification walls, but showed signs of decline in construction quality and urban planning. Houses were smaller and more cramped than their predecessors, streets narrower and less regularly laid out, and the overall impression is of a community struggling to maintain its former prosperity. The pottery assemblage from Troy VII's destruction level includes both local Anatolian wares and imported pieces from various Aegean sources, indicating continued trade connections despite the apparent military pressures. However, the quantity and quality of imported goods had declined significantly compared to earlier periods, suggesting economic disruption that preceded the final catastrophe. Storage areas within the citadel contained large quantities of grain and other foodstuffs, evidence of preparation for extended siege conditions. Contemporary with the troubles in western Anatolia, Egyptian and Levantine sources document increasing raids and population movements along the eastern Mediterranean coasts. The first clear references to seaborne raiders appear in Egyptian records from the reign of Merneptah, who faced a coalition of Libyan tribes and foreign peoples attempting to settle in the Nile Delta. The Karnak inscription describing Merneptah's victory mentions specific groups including the Luka, Shekelesh, and Teresh, peoples whose origins lay in the Aegean and Anatolian regions, experiencing simultaneous upheavals. These early raiding groups differed from later Sea Peoples invasions in their apparent coordination with established regional powers. The Libyan pharaoh Merye had formed alliances with various foreign contingents, suggesting that initial population movements involved organised military cooperation rather than desperate refugee migrations. Egyptian battle reliefs from Merneptah's mortuary temple show foreign warriors equipped with distinctive round shields, feathered headdresses, and bronze weapons fighting alongside Libyan forces in coordinated formations. Cypriot archaeological sites from this period reveal increasing evidence of violent destruction and abandonment. Nkomi, the island's principal copper-producing centre, shows signs of repeated attacks during the late 13th century, with destruction layers containing burned buildings, scattered metal working equipment, and hordes of valuable objects hastily buried. The site's final occupation level includes makeshift fortifications constructed from reused building stones, suggesting desperate attempts to defend against persistent threats. The copper industry that had made Cyprus wealthy began showing signs of disruption during this period. Smelting installations at major sites like Kishon and Kalavasos were abandoned or operated at reduced capacity, while the standardised oxhide ingot production that had characterised Cypriot metallurgy for centuries became irregular in both quality and quantity. Trade routes that had connected Cyprus to markets throughout the Mediterranean experienced increasing disruption, as evidenced by the declining distribution of Cypriot pottery and metalwork in foreign archaeological contexts. Ugarit's extensive archives provide detailed contemporary accounts of the growing crisis affecting the Levantine coast. Letters between the last king of Ugarit, Amurapi, and his overlord the Hittite king reveal mounting pressure from seaborne raiders and internal security problems. One particularly revealing document describes the departure of Ugarit's military forces to assist the Hittites in Anatolia, leaving the city vulnerable to attack from the sea. Amurapi's correspondence expresses growing desperation as reports of raids and destruction reached him from neighbouring territories. The administrative records from Ugarit's final period show significant changes in economic activity and social organisation, Tax collection became irregular, with numerous references to unpaid obligations and requests for deadline extensions. Trade contracts decreased in both number and scope, while legal documents reveal increasing disputes over property rights and commercial obligations. The city's cosmopolitan character, previously reflected in its multilingual archives, began giving way to more localized concerns as international connections weakened. Archaeological evidence from Ugarit's destruction around 1185 BC reveals a catastrophe that struck without warning. The royal palace and surrounding administrative buildings were consumed by fire, with cuneiform tablets baked hard by the intense heat, preserving their final records. Personal belongings scattered throughout residential areas suggest hasty evacuation, while the absence of systematic looting indicates that attackers were more interested in destruction than plunder. Climate research has identified significant environmental changes during the late 13th century BC that may have contributed to regional instability. Paleoclimatic data from various sources, including tree ring studies from Anatolian junipers, pollen analysis from eastern Mediterranean lake sediments, and isotopic analysis of speleothems from Levantine caves, indicates a period of increasing aridity and temperature fluctuations beginning around 1250 BC. The Anatolian tree ring chronology reveals a series of narrow growth rings corresponding to drought conditions during the late 13th century, with particularly severe episodes around 1230 and 1200 BC. These drought periods would have severely impacted agricultural production in regions dependent on rainfall, forcing populations to seek alternative territories or food sources. The timing of these climatic episodes corresponds closely with archaeological evidence of increased fortification and conflict throughout the region. Lake-level reconstructions from sites across the eastern Mediterranean show significant drops during this period, indicating reduced precipitation and increased evaporation rates. Lake Tiberias in the Jordan Valley experienced a marked lowering of water levels, while similar patterns appear in lakes throughout Anatolia and the northern Levant. These hydrological changes would have affected both agricultural productivity and the availability of fresh water for growing urban populations. Agricultural disruption resulting from climate change appears to have triggered population movements that initially took the form of organized raids rather than mass migrations. Communities facing crop failures and livestock losses would have been forced to seek resources elsewhere, either through trade, tribute extraction, or direct seizure. The warrior cultures of the Aegean and Western Anatolia possessed both the military capability and maritime technology necessary to pursue such strategies across considerable distances. Evidence for famine conditions during this period comes from various archaeological and textual sources. Grain storage facilities at sites throughout the region show signs of depletion, with large storage jars found empty or containing only residual traces of their former contents. Skeletal remains from cemetery sites reveal increased incidence of nutritional stress markers, including linear enamel hypoplasia and reduced stature, indicating prolonged periods of dietary inadequacy. The disruption of established trade networks exacerbated local food shortages by preventing the redistribution of surpluses from unaffected regions. Cyprus, which had relied heavily on imported grain to support its specialized copper-producing economy, faced particular difficulties as traditional suppliers in Egypt and the Levant experienced their own agricultural problems. The island's archaeological record shows increasing evidence of food storage and rationing during this period, with residential areas containing unusually large numbers of storage vessels. Hittite administrative documents reveal attempts to address food shortages through emergency measures, including the redistribution of temple grain reserves, the suspension of tribute obligations for affected territories, and the negotiation of grain imports from Egypt. However, these measures appear to have provided only temporary relief, as references to famine conditions continue throughout the final decades of Hittite rule. The combination of climate change, agricultural disruption, and resulting population pressures created conditions that transformed localized conflicts into regional crises. Communities that had previously coexisted peacefully found themselves competing for diminishing resources, while the breakdown of established trade relationships eliminated traditional mechanisms for resolving such disputes. The sophisticated diplomatic and economic systems that had maintained stability throughout the Late Bronze Age proved inadequate to address challenges of this magnitude and geographic scope. The mounting pressures that had been building throughout the late 13th century BC reached their devastating climax in the period between 1200 and 1150 BC, as a cascade of destruction swept across the eastern Mediterranean with unprecedented speed and thoroughness. The sophisticated urban centres that had anchored Bronze Age civilization for centuries fell one after another, their palaces consumed by flames, their populations scattered, and their administrative systems obliterated. This systematic collapse left behind an archaeological signature so distinctive that modern excavators can identify the destruction layers with remarkable precision, revealing the extent and intensity of the catastrophe that befell the ancient world. Pylos, the administrative heart of southwestern Greece under the Wonax Nestor, provides perhaps the most dramatic evidence of this sudden collapse. The palace complex, which had functioned as the region's political, economic and religious centre for generations, was destroyed around 1180 BC in a conflagration so intense that it baked the Linear B tablets in the administrative archives, inadvertently preserving them for modern scholars. The final tablets from the palace reveal a state apparatus still functioning normally until the very end, with records of religious offerings, military equipment distributions, and routine administrative matters dated to the final months before destruction. Archaeological excavation of the Pylos destruction layer reveals the violence and haste of the final assault. Bronze weapons lie scattered throughout the palace corridors, including spearheads embedded in doorframes and arrowheads found in storage areas where defenders made their last stands. The throne room megaron shows evidence of intense burning, with collapsed roof timbers creating a charcoal layer over a metre thick in some areas. Fragments of decorated frescoes, their painted plaster surfaces bearing scorch marks, lie mixed with broken pottery and twisted bronze vessels throughout the ruins. The administrative wing of the palace provides particularly poignant evidence of the catastrophe's suddenness. Scribes' workstations contain unfinished tablets with stylus marks still visible, while clay ceilings remain scattered across floors where they fell from burning wooden shelves. Storage areas that once contained the palace's extensive archives show signs of systematic destruction, with tablet fragments mixed with ash and debris in patterns suggesting deliberate vandalism rather than accidental fire damage. Personal belongings found throughout the palace complex indicate that the inhabitants had no opportunity for organised evacuation. Bronze mirrors, ivory combs, and gold jewellery lie abandoned in residential areas, while cooking vessels still containing carbonised food remains suggest that daily life continued normally until the moment of attack. Children's toys, including small bronze animals and ceramic figurines, scattered throughout domestic quarters provide haunting testimony to families caught completely unprepared for the disaster that overwhelmed them. The surrounding settlement at Pylos shows similar evidence of violent destruction, with residential areas containing burned houses, scattered possessions, and hastily buried hoards of valuables. Several caches of bronze objects, including weapons, tools, and vessels, were discovered in locations suggesting their owners intended to return and retrieve them once the danger had passed. The systematic nature of the destruction, affecting both the palace centre and surrounding communities simultaneously, indicates a coordinated assault by forces capable of overwhelming the region's defensive capabilities. Tiryns, with its massive Cyclopean fortifications, might have been expected to withstand the attacks that destroyed less well-defended sites, yet it too fell victim to the general catastrophe. The citadel's destruction around 1200 BC reveals that Even the most sophisticated defensive systems of the Bronze Age proved inadequate against the forces unleashed during this period. The palace complex within the fortress walls was thoroughly burned, with destruction debris reaching depths of several meters in some areas. Evidence from Tiryns suggests that the attackers possessed detailed knowledge of the fortress's defensive weaknesses. Breaches in the Cyclopean walls occur at points where the massive stone blocks were joined with smaller stones, indicating that the assault was conducted by forces familiar with Bronze Age fortification techniques. The complex entrance system, designed to channel attackers through multiple choke points, shows signs of having been bypassed or overcome through coordinated assault tactics. The lower citadel at Tiryns contains evidence of desperate defensive preparations undertaken as the crisis approached. Residential buildings near the walls were demolished to create clear fields of fire, while their stone foundations were incorporated into hastily constructed additional defensive works. Storage areas throughout the fortress were packed with supplies, including large quantities of arrows, spear points, and bronze armor pieces, suggesting that the defenders had time to prepare for siege conditions, but ultimately proved unable to withstand the final assault. Hattusa, the great capital of the Hittite Empire, suffered perhaps the most complete destruction of any Bronze Age centre. The city's abandonment around 1180 BC marked not just the fall of a single settlement, but the collapse of an entire imperial system that had dominated Anatolia and northern Syria for centuries. Archaeological evidence reveals that Hattusa was systematically destroyed and then deliberately abandoned, with its population apparently evacuating in organised fashion before the final conflagration. The royal citadel at Hattusa shows signs of careful preparation for abandonment, with valuable objects removed and archives apparently transferred elsewhere before the destruction. However, the administrative buildings and temples were thoroughly burned, creating destruction layers containing thousands of cuneiform tablets that provide detailed insights into the empire's final period. These documents reveal increasing military pressures, economic difficulties, and administrative breakdown in the years preceding the capital's fall. The great temple complexes at Hattusa were subjected to particularly systematic destruction. Temple 1, the largest religious structure in the Hittite world, was stripped of its valuable fittings before being burned, with bronze cult objects and precious metal decorations apparently removed by the departing population. The temple's storage areas, which had contained vast quantities of grain, oil, and other offerings, were found empty except for scattered pottery fragments and carbonized organic remains. Residential areas throughout Hattusa reveal a pattern of organized evacuation followed by deliberate destruction. Houses contained few personal belongings, suggesting that inhabitants had time to gather their possessions before departing, yet the buildings themselves were thoroughly burned. This pattern indicates that the city's abandonment was planned and executed by its own population, rather than resulting from sudden conquest by external forces. The water supply systems that had made Hattusa's large population possible were deliberately sabotaged during the abandonment. Underground channels were blocked with stones and debris, while surface installations were damaged beyond easy repair. These actions suggest that the evacuating population intended to prevent the site's reoccupation by hostile forces, effectively denying the strategic advantages that had made Hattusa an imperial capital. Ugarit's destruction around 1185 BC eliminated one of the most cosmopolitan and economically important centres of the late Bronze Age world. The city's position as an intermediary between the great powers and its extensive commercial networks made its loss particularly significant for the broader collapse of Mediterranean civilization. Archaeological evidence reveals that Ugarit, like other major centres, was destroyed suddenly and completely, with no signs of gradual decline or partial abandonment. The royal palace at Ugarit was consumed by fire so intense that bronze objects melted and fused with stone architectural elements. The palace's extensive archives, containing thousands of tablets in multiple languages and scripts, were baked hard by the heat. preserving diplomatic correspondence, commercial contracts, and administrative records that provide unique insights into the international system's final period. The last letters found in the archives describe urgent requests for military assistance and reports of seaborne raiders approaching the coast. Ugarit's destruction was accompanied by the systematic dismantling of its commercial infrastructure. Harbour installations were damaged, with stone blocks from quays and warehouses scattered by what appears to have been deliberate demolition. The city's metalworking quarter, which had produced bronze objects for export throughout the Mediterranean, shows evidence of hasty evacuation, with furnaces abandoned while still containing partially processed materials. The residential areas of Ugarit reveal the same pattern of sudden catastrophe found at other destroyed sites. Houses contained scattered possessions, overturned furniture, and evidence of fire damage, while streets are littered with pottery fragments and other debris. Several hoards of valuable objects, including silver vessels, jewellery and bronze weapons, were discovered buried in residential areas, indicating that some inhabitants had time to conceal their wealth before fleeing or perishing. The destruction of Ugarit had immediate consequences for trade networks throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The city's commercial houses had maintained trading relationships with partners in Cyprus, Egypt, the Aegean and Mesopotamia, and its elimination created a gap in the commercial system that could not easily be filled. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the region shows a sharp decline in imported goods and luxury items following Ugarit's destruction, indicating the broader economic impact of its loss. Archaeological surveys throughout the eastern Mediterranean reveal that the destruction of major centres was accompanied by the abandonment of hundreds of smaller settlements. In Greece, over 90% of Mycenaean sites show evidence of destruction or abandonment during the period between 1200 and 1150 BC. This pattern extends beyond the major palace centres to include small towns, rural settlements, and specialised sites such as metalworking centres and religious sanctuaries. The systematic nature of this widespread abandonment suggests coordinated attacks by forces capable of operating across vast distances and diverse terrains. Coastal sites were particularly vulnerable, with evidence of seaborne attacks found at locations throughout the Aegean Islands, coastal Anatolia, and the Levantine littoral. However, inland sites also suffered destruction, indicating that the attackers possessed both maritime and terrestrial military capabilities. Evidence of hasty burial practices appears at sites throughout the affected regions, with valuable objects concealed in locations suggesting their owners intended to return and retrieve them once the danger had passed. These hoards typically contain bronze weapons and tools, precious metal objects, and sometimes raw materials such as copper ingots or silver bars. The widespread distribution of such hoards and their similar composition patterns suggest that communities throughout the region face similar threats and responded with similar defensive strategies. The collapse of administrative systems is evident in the sudden cessation of written records at sites throughout the affected areas. Linear B tablets from Greek sites end abruptly around 1200 BC, while cuneiform archives from Anatolian and Levantine centres show similar termination dates. This loss of literacy had profound consequences for the transmission of knowledge, administrative practices, and cultural traditions that had developed over centuries of Bronze Age civilization. Trade networks that had connected communities across thousands of kilometres disintegrated rapidly following the destruction of major centres. Archaeological evidence shows a sharp decline in the distribution of goods that had previously circulated widely, including Cypriot copper, Aegean pottery, Egyptian gold objects, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals. This commercial collapse forced communities to become more self-sufficient, leading to technological regression in areas that had previously relied on specialised production and long-distance exchange. The breakdown of centralised authority systems led to the fragmentation of previously unified territories into isolated communities. In Greece, the unified Mycenaean palace-states gave way to small, independent settlements with limited territorial control. Archaeological evidence shows a dramatic reduction in site sizes, with post-destruction settlements typically covering only a fraction of their Bronze Age predecessors' areas. Population levels declined dramatically throughout the affected regions, with demographic estimates suggesting reductions of 75% or more in many areas. This population collapse resulted from a combination of warfare casualties, disease, famine, and large-scale migration as communities fled their traditional territories in search of security and resources. The demographic recovery took centuries in most regions, with some areas remaining sparsely populated well into the Iron Age. Technological regression accompanied the collapse of specialized craft production systems. Bronze working, which had reached extraordinary levels of sophistication during the late Bronze Age, declined dramatically as trade networks for raw materials disintegrated and specialized knowledge was lost. Iron working, which began developing during this period, initially produced objects of inferior quality compared to the bronze technology it gradually replaced. The destruction layers found at sites throughout the eastern Mediterranean contain remarkably consistent evidence of the catastrophe's nature and timing. Pottery styles, radiocarbon dates, and stratigraphic relationships all point to a synchronized collapse occurring within a span of approximately 50 years. This temporal concentration suggests that the forces responsible for the destruction possess the organizational capability and military resources necessary to conduct coordinated campaigns across vast distances and diverse political territories. The chaos consuming the eastern Mediterranean during the late 13th century BC reached Egyptian shores during the 5th regnal year of Pharaoh Meneptah, when a massive coalition of Libyan tribes and foreign warriors launched an unprecedented assault on the Nile Delta. This invasion marked the first documented large-scale encounter between Egypt and the peoples who would later be collectively known as the Sea Peoples, establishing patterns of conflict that would define Egyptian foreign policy for the next century. The threat emerged from the Western Desert, where the Libyan chieftain Marie had assembled a confederation that combined traditional North African pastoral warriors with seaborne raiders from the collapsing Aegean and Anatolian worlds. Meneptah ascended to the throne as an elderly man, having served as crown prince under his father Ramses II for decades before assuming power. His reign began during a period of relative stability, with Egypt's borders secure and the empire's administrative system functioning effectively after the territorial consolidations achieved during the previous century. The new pharaoh inherited a military establishment that had been reorganized and re-equipped during the later years of Ramses II's reign, incorporating lessons learned from conflicts with the Hittites and various Asiatic peoples. However, nothing in Egypt's previous military experience had prepared the kingdom for the scale and nature of the threat that would emerge from the Western approaches. The Libyan confederation that challenged Egyptian authority represented a fundamental departure from traditional patterns of desert warfare. Previous conflicts with Libyan tribes had typically involved relatively small-scale raiding parties seeking livestock, captives, or temporary access to Nile Valley resources during drought periods. These encounters, while sometimes requiring significant military responses, had generally been contained within established frameworks of frontier defence and diplomatic negotiation. The coalition assembled by Marie, however, possessed both the numerical strength and organisational sophistication necessary to threaten Egypt's territorial integrity in ways that had not been seen since the Second Intermediate Period. Archaeological evidence from sites along Egypt's western frontier reveals extensive preparations for the coming conflict. Fortress installations at locations like Zawiyatum el-Rakam, constructed during the reign of Ramses II, were reinforced and expanded during Meneptah's early years. These defensive works incorporated advanced military engineering techniques, including overlapping fields of fire from archer positions, multiple gate systems designed to channel attackers into killing zones, and underground storage facilities capable of sustaining garrisons during extended sieges. The scale of these fortifications indicates that Egyptian military planners anticipated threats significantly more serious than traditional Libyan raids. The composition of Meria's coalition revealed the interconnected nature of the crisis affecting the entire eastern Mediterranean world. Alongside traditional Libyan tribal contingents from the Meshwesh and other Western peoples, the Confederation included substantial numbers of foreign warriors bearing distinctive equipment and fighting techniques that marked them as originating from the collapsing civilizations of the Aegean and Anatolia. Egyptian artistic depictions of these foreign contingents provide detailed visual evidence of their appearance, weaponry, and tactical organization, offering crucial insights into the nature of the population movements that were reshaping the ancient world. The Meneptah stele, discovered at Thebes and now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, provides the most comprehensive contemporary account of the conflict and its participants. This granite monument, standing over 3 meters tall and covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions, describes the invasion and Egypt's victorious response in language that combines traditional pharaonic boasting with surprisingly specific details about the enemy forces and the course of the campaign. The stele identifies specific foreign groups within the coalition, providing the first clear documentary evidence for peoples who would continue to challenge Egyptian authority for generations. According to the stele's account, the Libyan coalition included contingents of Ekwesh, described as warriors equipped with bronze swords and round shields who fought in close formation. These fighters are depicted wearing distinctive kilts and carrying weapons that differ significantly from traditional Egyptian or Libyan equipment. Their tactical employment, as described in Egyptian battle accounts, involved coordinated charges designed to break enemy formations through shock action, a technique that suggests military traditions derived from Aegean or Anatolian warfare practices. The Teresh contingent within Meria's forces presented different challenges for Egyptian defenders. These warriors are described as expert archers and skirmishers who employed hit-and-run tactics designed to disrupt Egyptian formations before melting away into difficult terrain. Their equipment included composite bows of advanced design, bronze-tipped arrows, and light armour that emphasised mobility over protection. Egyptian military records indicate that countering Teresh tactics required modifications to traditional Egyptian battlefield procedures, including the deployment of specialised light infantry units and the development of new pursuit techniques. Luka warriors, already familiar to Egyptian forces from previous encounters in Anatolia during the reigns of earlier pharaohs, formed another significant component of the coalition. These fighters brought with them expertise in siege warfare and mountain combat that proved particularly valuable during the campaign's later phases. Egyptian reliefs show Luka contingents equipped with scaling ladders, siege hooks, and other specialised equipment designed for assaulting fortified positions. Their inclusion in Meria's forces provided the coalition with capabilities that traditional Libyan warfare had previously lacked. The Shurden, who had appeared in Egyptian records as both enemies and allies during previous reigns, contributed naval expertise and amphibious assault capabilities to the coalition. These warriors possessed advanced shipbuilding knowledge and maritime combat techniques that enabled the coalition to coordinate land-based attacks with seaborne operations along the Delta coast. Egyptian naval records describe encounters with Shurden vessels equipped with bronze-reinforced rams and crewed by warriors trained in boarding actions and coastal raiding techniques. Shekelesh contingents rounded out the foreign component of Meria's coalition, bringing with them metallurgical expertise and advanced weapon manufacturing capabilities. Archaeological evidence from the campaign's aftermath includes bronze weapons and tools bearing distinctive technological signatures that can be traced to Shekelesh production techniques. These artifacts reveal sophisticated alloying practices and heat treatment methods that produced weapons superior in many respects to traditional Egyptian bronze work. The coalition's advance toward the Nile Delta began during the flooding season of Merneptah's fifth regnal year, when the annual inundation typically provided Egypt with natural defensive advantages. However, Meri's forces demonstrated sophisticated understanding of Egyptian seasonal patterns by timing their approach to coincide with periods when the floodwaters would restrict Egyptian mobility while providing the invaders with alternative routes through normally impassable terrain. This strategic timing suggests that the coalition possessed detailed intelligence about Egyptian defensive arrangements and seasonal vulnerabilities. Egyptian frontier scouts first reported the coalition's approach near the oasis of Siwa, where advance elements had established supply bases and conducted reconnaissance operations. These initial contacts revealed the unprecedented scale of the threat, with estimates placing the coalition's total strength at over 20,000 warriors, plus substantial numbers of non-combatants including families, livestock, and baggage trains. The presence of women, children, and household goods indicated that this was not merely a raiding expedition, but a genuine migration seeking permanent settlement in Egyptian territory. Merneptah's response to the crisis demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of New Kingdom military organization. The pharaoh ordered the mobilization of Egypt's professional military forces, including chariot squadrons from Memphis and Thebes, infantry divisions recruited from Upper and Lower Egypt, and auxiliary units drawn from Nubian and other allied populations. This mobilization required several months to complete, during which the coalition continued its advance toward the delta's western approaches. The Egyptian military machine that assembled to meet this threat represented the culmination of centuries of military development and organizational refinement. Chariot forces formed the elite striking arm, with vehicles manufactured in royal workshops using the finest materials available. Each chariot carried a crew of 2, a driver responsible for vehicle control and tactical maneuvering, and a warrior equipped with composite bow, bronze-tipped arrows, and backup weapons for close combat. The chariots themselves featured lightweight wooden frames reinforced with bronze fittings, spoked wheels designed for speed and maneuverability, and leather components that provided flexibility while maintaining structural integrity. Infantry formations included both heavy and light troops organized into divisions theoretically containing 5,000 men each, though actual strengths varied considerably based on recruitment success and campaign requirements. Heavy infantry carried bronze-tipped spears, rectangular shields constructed from wood and leather, and wore bronze-scale armour that provided protection while maintaining mobility. Light infantry served as skirmishers and archers, equipped with composite bows, bronze daggers, and minimal armour that emphasized speed and flexibility over defensive capability. The decisive confrontation occurred in the western delta region, near the site of modern Kom el Ahmar, where geographical features channeled the coalition's advance into terrain favourable for Egyptian tactical deployment. Merneptah's forces had established defensive positions that took advantage of natural obstacles while providing optimal fields of fire for archer units and clear approaches for chariot charges. The battle's location, approximately 150 kilometers from Memphis, demonstrated the coalition's success in penetrating deep into Egyptian territory before meeting organized resistance. Egyptian battle accounts describe a multi-day engagement that began with skirmishing between advance elements and escalated into a general confrontation involving the full strength of both forces. The coalition's initial attacks focused on Egyptian chariot squadrons, attempting to neutralize Egypt's primary tactical advantage through concentrated missile fire and coordinated infantry assaults. However, Egyptian tactical flexibility and superior coordination eventually prevailed, with chariot forces conducting flanking maneuvers that disrupted coalition formations and created opportunities for infantry advances. The battle's turning point came when Egyptian forces succeeded in isolating Merier's command group from the main coalition forces. Egyptian chariots, operating in coordinated squadrons, penetrated coalition lines and captured or killed key leaders, including members of Merier's immediate family. This tactical success created confusion within coalition ranks and enabled Egyptian infantry to exploit gaps in enemy formations. The collapse of centralized command led to the disintegration of coalition cohesion, with individual contingents attempting to withdraw independently rather than maintaining coordinated resistance. Egyptian casualty figures, as recorded in official accounts, claim minimal losses compared to the devastation inflicted on the coalition forces. While these numbers undoubtedly reflect the propaganda requirements of royal inscriptions rather than accurate battlefield statistics, archaeological evidence from the battle site supports the conclusion that Egyptian forces achieved a decisive victory. Weapons and equipment scattered across the battlefield include numerous examples of foreign manufacture, confirming the diverse composition of Merier's coalition and the international scope of the conflict. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scale of the coalition's ambitions and the thoroughness of Egypt's victory. Egyptian forces captured over 9,000 prisoners, including substantial numbers of women and children, indicating that entire communities had participated in the migration attempt. Livestock herds numbering in the tens of thousands were seized, along with bronze weapons, tools and other equipment that provided valuable intelligence about the coalition's origins and capabilities. The treatment of prisoners following the battle demonstrated Egyptian administrative efficiency and strategic thinking about future security requirements. Rather than executing captured warriors or selling them into slavery, Merneptah's government incorporated many into Egyptian military service, particularly those with specialized skills in metallurgy, shipbuilding or siege warfare. This policy reflected both practical resource management and recognition that the skills possessed by these foreign warriors could benefit Egyptian military capabilities. The victory's immediate consequences extended far beyond the battlefield itself. Egyptian control over the Western Delta was firmly re-established, with new fortress installations constructed at strategic locations to prevent future coalition attempts. The captured equipment and prisoners provided valuable intelligence about conditions in the Aegean and Anatolian regions, enabling Egyptian strategic planners to better understand the broader crisis affecting the Eastern Mediterranean world. Merneptah's triumph also had significant diplomatic ramifications throughout the region. Egyptian prestige, which had suffered during the later years of Ramses II's reign due to economic difficulties and administrative challenges, was dramatically restored by the decisive defeat of such a formidable coalition. Tributary relationships with Asiatic peoples were renewed on terms favourable to Egypt, while potential enemies throughout the region were forced to recalculate their assessments of Egyptian military capabilities. The identification of specific foreign groups within Merier's coalition provided Egyptian intelligence services with crucial information about the population movements reshaping the ancient world. The presence of Aegean and Anatolian peoples in such large numbers confirmed that the destruction of Bronze Age civilizations was generating massive refugee populations seeking new territories for settlement. This intelligence would prove invaluable during subsequent encounters with similar groups throughout Merneptah's reign and beyond. The lessons learned from Merneptah's encounters with the Libyan coalition and their foreign allies would prove invaluable to his successor, Ramses III, who ascended to the throne around 1186 BC to face an even more formidable challenge. The new pharaoh inherited an Egypt that had successfully weathered the initial storm of population movements from the collapsing Bronze Age world, but the respite proved temporary. During the 5th and 8th years of Ramses III's reign, coordinated assaults by Sea Peoples coalitions would test Egyptian military capabilities to their absolute limits, culminating in naval engagements that represented the largest and most sophisticated maritime battles of the ancient world. Ramses III's accession occurred during a period of relative stability that mask the continuing deterioration of conditions throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian intelligence networks, expanded following Merneptah's victories, provided detailed reports of ongoing destruction in Anatolia, the Levant, and the Aegean Islands. The systematic collapse of urban centres, trade networks, and political authorities in these regions generated massive population displacements that Egyptian strategic planners recognised would inevitably impact the Nile Valley. Unlike his predecessor, who had faced primarily land-based threats from the Western Desert, Ramses III would confront enemies possessing advanced naval capabilities and maritime combat experience gained through decades of seaborne raiding and conquest. The Sea Peoples coalition that emerged during Ramses III's reign represented a fundamental evolution from the forces encountered by Merneptah. Where earlier groups had operated as auxiliary contingents within Libyan tribal confederations, the new threat consisted of organised maritime powers capable of independent strategic action across vast distances. These peoples possessed sophisticated shipbuilding technology, advanced metallurgical skills, and military traditions that combined elements from the collapsed civilizations of the Bronze Age world with innovations developed during their years of displacement and conflict. The Peleset emerged as the most prominent and militarily capable group within this new coalition. Archaeological evidence from their eventual settlement areas in the southern Levant reveals a people possessing advanced urban planning knowledge, sophisticated pottery-making techniques, and metallurgical skills that produced weapons and tools superior to many contemporary examples. Their military organisation incorporated elements of both Aegean and Anatolian warfare traditions, including the use of iron weapons that gave them significant advantages over opponents still relying primarily on bronze equipment. Peleset warriors, as depicted in Egyptian battle reliefs at Medinet Habu, wore distinctive feathered headdresses that became their most recognisable identifying feature. These elaborate constructions, apparently made from ostrich plumes arranged in radiating patterns, served both ceremonial and practical purposes by making individual warriors appear larger and more intimidating while providing unit identification during complex battlefield manoeuvres. Their body armour consisted of bronze-scale corselets worn over linen tunics, with bronze greaves protecting their lower legs during close combat operations. The weaponry employed by Peleset forces demonstrated technological sophistication that reflected their origins in the advanced Bronze Age civilizations of the Aegean and Anatolia. Their primary weapons included long bronze swords designed for both thrusting and slashing attacks, bronze-tipped spears with reinforced wooden shafts, and round shields constructed from bronze-reinforced leather stretched over wooden frames. Archaeological examples of Peleset weapons reveal advanced metallurgical techniques including pattern welding, differential hardening, and decorative inlays that combined functional effectiveness with artistic excellence. Peleset naval capabilities represented perhaps their most significant military asset. Their ships, reconstructed from Egyptian artistic depictions and archaeological remains from later settlement sites, featured advanced design elements that enabled long-distance voyaging and effective combat operations. These vessels typically measured 25 metres in length, with high prows and sterns decorated with bird head ornaments that served both religious and practical identification purposes. The ship's construction utilised sophisticated joinery techniques that created flexible yet durable hulls capable of withstanding the stresses of open ocean navigation and combat manoeuvring. The Cheka contingent within the Sea Peoples Coalition brought specialised expertise in siege warfare and fortification techniques. Egyptian records describe Cheka warriors as particularly skilled in conducting assault operations against defended positions, employing scaling equipment, siege towers, and undermining techniques that reflected extensive experience in urban warfare. Their equipment included bronze-reinforced leather armour that provided protection, while maintaining the mobility necessary for assault operations, along with specialized tools designed for breaching walls and gates. Tieka military organization emphasized small unit tactics and independent operations that enabled them to function effectively in diverse terrain and tactical situations. Their warriors operated in groups of 10, 20 men under experienced leaders who possessed authority to adapt tactics based on local conditions without requiring approval from higher command levels. This organizational flexibility proved particularly valuable during amphibious operations, where rapid adaptation to changing circumstances often determined success or failure. The Danaan brought to the coalition advanced knowledge of metallurgy and weapon manufacturing that enhanced the overall military capabilities of Sea People's forces. Archaeological evidence from sites associated with Danaan settlement reveals sophisticated bronze-working facilities capable of producing weapons and tools in quantity sufficient to equip large military formations. Their metallurgical techniques included advanced alloying practices that produced bronze with superior hardness and durability compared to many contemporary examples. Danaan warriors specialized in missile warfare, employing composite bows of advanced design that could penetrate bronze armor at ranges exceeding 200 meters. Their arrows featured bronze points with specialized designs for different tactical applications, including bodkin points for armor penetration, broadheads for maximum tissue damage, and fire arrows for attacking wooden structures and ships. The accuracy and range of Danaan archery units provided Sea People's coalitions with significant tactical advantages during both land and naval engagements. Washesh contingents contributed expertise in amphibious warfare and coastal raiding operations that proved crucial during the coalition's assault on the Nile Delta. These warriors possessed detailed knowledge of tidal patterns, coastal geography, and beach assault techniques that enabled coordinated attacks combining naval and land forces. Their ships featured shallow drafts and reinforced construction that allowed them to operate in coastal waters and river mouths, where larger vessels could not safely navigate. Washesh military equipment emphasized mobility and versatility, with warriors carrying lighter armor and weapons designed for rapid deployment and flexible tactical employment. Their primary weapons included bronze-tipped javelins designed for both thrown and thrusting attacks, curved swords optimized for close combat, and small round shields that provided protection while maintaining maximum mobility. This equipment configuration enabled Washesh units to function effectively as both naval boarding parties and light infantry during land operations. The Shekelesh, already familiar to Egyptian forces from their participation in Merier's coalition, returned as a more organized and militarily sophisticated force during Ramses III's reign. Their continued presence in Sea People's coalitions demonstrated the persistent nature of the population movements affecting the Eastern Mediterranean and the evolution of these groups' military capabilities over time. Shekelesh warriors had apparently learned from their earlier defeats, adopting new equipment and tactics that reflected their accumulated combat experience. Shekelesh naval forces specialized in commerce raiding and blockade operations that targeted Egyptian supply lines and trade routes. Their ships featured reinforced construction and bronze-reinforced rams that enabled them to conduct effective attacks against merchant vessels and transport ships. The economic warfare conducted by Shekelesh units complemented the direct military operations of other coalition members by disrupting Egyptian logistics and reducing the kingdom's ability to sustain prolonged military campaigns. The coalition's strategic approach during Ramses III's fifth regnal year demonstrated sophisticated planning and coordination capabilities that exceeded anything previously encountered by Egyptian forces. Rather than launching a single concentrated assault, the Sea Peoples employed a multi-pronged strategy that simultaneously threatened Egyptian positions along the Mediterranean coast, in the Nile Delta, and along the kingdom's Asiatic frontiers. This coordinated approach stretched Egyptian defensive resources and prevented the concentration of forces that had enabled Merneptah's earlier victories. The initial phase of the campaign began with seaborne raids against Egyptian coastal installations and trading centres. These attacks, conducted by combined Peleset and Washesh naval forces, targeted ports, warehouses and shipbuilding facilities that supported Egypt's maritime commerce and naval capabilities. The raids were characterised by their precision and coordination, with attackers demonstrating detailed knowledge of Egyptian coastal defences and the locations of valuable targets. Egyptian coastal fortifications, constructed primarily to defend against traditional land-based threats, proved inadequate against seaborne assault tactics employed by Sea People's forces. The fortress installations that had successfully deterred Libyan raids lacked the naval support and specialised equipment necessary to counter amphibious attacks. Coastal watchtowers, designed to provide early warning of approaching enemies, found their effectiveness limited by the speed and mobility of Sea People's naval forces. The Sea People's advance toward the Nile Delta represented the campaign's most critical phase. A success would provide them with access to Egypt's agricultural heartland and administrative centres. Intelligence reports reaching Ramses III described a massive coalition force moving south along the Levantine coast, systematically destroying or occupying Egyptian client states and allied territories. The speed of this advance, combined with reports of simultaneous naval operations in the eastern Mediterranean, indicated coordination capabilities that exceeded Egyptian estimates of Sea People's organisational sophistication. Ramses III's response to this unprecedented threat required mobilising Egypt's entire military establishment, while simultaneously developing new tactical approaches specifically designed to counter Sea People's capabilities. The Pharaoh ordered the construction of specialised naval vessels equipped for combat operations in the confined waters of the Nile Delta, where traditional Egyptian rivercraft would prove inadequate against purpose-built warships. These new vessels featured reinforced construction, bronze-reinforced rams, and elevated fighting platforms that enabled Egyptian warriors to engage Sea People's ships on equal terms. The great naval battle that would determine the campaign's outcome occurred in the eastern delta, where the Peleset branch of the Nile provided Sea People's forces with access to Egypt's interior while constraining their tactical options within relatively narrow waterways. Egyptian strategic planners recognized that forcing the engagement in these confined waters would neutralize many of the advantages that Sea People's naval forces had demonstrated during open water operations. The battle site selection reflected sophisticated understanding of naval tactical principles and demonstrated Egyptian adaptability in developing new strategic approaches. The engagement began when Sea People's naval forces, advancing in coordinated formations, encountered Egyptian defensive positions established at strategic points along the waterway. Egyptian forces had prepared elaborate defensive works, including underwater obstacles, fire ships positioned for release at optimal moments, and archer positions on both banks that created overlapping fields of fire across the water. These preparations reflected months of planning and demonstrated Egyptian engineering capabilities in adapting traditional siege warfare techniques to naval combat requirements. The battle reliefs carved on the walls of Ramses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu provide the most detailed visual record of ancient naval combat ever preserved. These extensive artistic depictions show Egyptian and Sea People's vessels engaged in close combat, with warriors fighting from elevated platforms, while ships manoeuvred for tactical advantage. The reliefs reveal specific details of ship construction, weapons employment, and tactical formations that provide invaluable insights into Bronze Age naval warfare techniques. Egyptian ships depicted in the Medinet Habu reliefs feature distinctive design elements that differentiate them from their Sea People's counterparts. Egyptian vessels show higher freeboard and more elaborate superstructures that provided elevated fighting positions for archers and spearmen. Their construction emphasized stability and defensive capability over speed and maneuverability, reflecting tactical approaches that sought to maximize Egyptian advantages in missile warfare, while minimizing the impact of Sea People's superiority in close combat techniques. Sea People's vessels, by contrast, display lower profiles and more streamlined construction that emphasize speed and agility. Their ships feature prominent rams at the waterline and elevated prow and stern sections decorated with bird head ornaments. The vessel's construction appears optimized for ramming attacks and boarding operations, with minimal superstructure that would have reduced weight while providing clear deck space for warrior movements during combat. The weapons and equipment visible in the Medinet Habu battle scenes provide detailed evidence of the technological capabilities possessed by both sides. Egyptian warriors are shown employing composite bows, bronze-tipped arrows and long spears designed for thrusting attacks from elevated positions. Their equipment emphasizes missile warfare and defensive combat from prepared positions, reflecting tactical approaches that maximized Egyptian organizational advantages while minimizing exposure to Sea People's close combat expertise. Sea People's warriors depicted in the reliefs carry the distinctive weapons and equipment that characterize their military traditions. Peleset fighters show their characteristic feathered headdresses, round shields and long bronze swords, while other groups display specialized equipment appropriate to their tactical roles. The artistic depictions reveal the diversity of weapons and fighting techniques employed by different Sea People's groups while demonstrating their coordination in complex multi-unit operations. The tactical success of Egyptian forces during the Great Naval Battle represented only one aspect of a much larger historical puzzle that has challenged scholars for over a century. While Ramses III's victory preserved Egyptian independence and demonstrated the kingdom's military adaptability, the identity and origins of the Sea Peoples themselves remained enigmatic even to contemporary observers. Egyptian scribes recorded their names, depicted their distinctive equipment and appearance, and documented their military capabilities, yet the fundamental questions of where these peoples originated and how they related to known historical groups continue to generate scholarly debate and archaeological investigation. The Peleset, identified as the most militarily formidable component of the Sea People's coalition, present perhaps the strongest case for connecting these maritime raiders to established historical populations. Archaeological evidence from their eventual settlement areas in the southern Levant reveals material culture patterns that strongly suggest identification with the Philistines, known from biblical and other ancient Near Eastern sources. Excavations at sites like Ashkelon, Ekron and Gath have uncovered pottery assemblages, architectural remains and burial practices that demonstrate clear continuities with Aegean traditions while simultaneously showing adaptation to Levantine conditions. The pottery evidence from early Philistine sites provides particularly compelling support for Aegean origins. Ceramic vessels found in 12th century BC contexts at Ashkelon include cooking pots, storage jars, and drinking vessels that display technological and stylistic features directly traceable to late Helladic 3C pottery traditions from mainland Greece and the Aegean islands. These vessels show distinctive tempering techniques, surface treatments, and decorative motifs that had no precedent in Canaanite ceramic traditions, but demonstrate clear continuities with Mycenaean pottery-making practices. Mycenaean stirrup jars, characterized by their distinctive false spout and basket handle configuration, appear in modified forms at Philistine sites throughout the 12th and 11th centuries BC. While these vessels show adaptation to local functional requirements and available raw materials, their basic construction techniques and proportional relationships remain consistent with Aegean prototypes. The persistence of these ceramic traditions through multiple generations of settlement indicates that Philistine communities maintained cultural practices derived from their pre-migration homeland despite their new geographical and political circumstances, architectural evidence from Philistine settlements reveals similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation. The Megaron-style buildings discovered at sites like Tel Kassil and Ekron demonstrate knowledge of Aegean construction techniques that had no parallel in traditional Levantine architecture. These structures feature characteristic elements including central hearths surrounded by 4 columns, entrance porches, and proportional relationships that mirror those found in Mycenaean palace complexes. The adaptation of these architectural forms to Levantine conditions, using local stone and mud brick construction techniques, suggest communities that retained cultural memories of their origins while adapting to new environmental circumstances. Burial practices documented at Philistine cemeteries provide additional evidence for Aegean connections while revealing the complex cultural transformations that occurred during the settlement process. The cemetery at Ashkelon, dating to the 11th and 10th centuries BC, contains both cremation and inhumation burials that reflect diverse cultural traditions within Philistine communities. Cremation burials, rare in traditional Canaanite practice but common in late Bronze Age Greece, appear alongside inhumation burials that show adaptation to local customs and environmental conditions. Grave goods from Philistine burials demonstrate the material culture synthesis that characterized these communities. Bronze fibulae of Aegean types appear alongside locally produced pottery and jewellery, while iron weapons show technological innovations that combined metallurgical knowledge from multiple sources. The presence of imported Cypriot pottery and other Mediterranean goods in burial contexts indicates that Philistine communities maintained commercial connections with their broader cultural sphere despite their geographical displacement. The Sherden present a more complex identification challenge, with proposed connections to Sardinia supported by linguistic evidence and archaeological parallels, but complicated by chronological and geographical considerations. The similarity between the names Sherden and Sardinia has attracted scholarly attention since the 19th century, with proponents of this identification pointing to warrior traditions, metallurgical practices, and material culture elements that appear in both contexts. However, the relationship between Bronze Age Sardinian populations and the Sherden, documented in Egyptian sources, remains disputed due to limited archaeological evidence and uncertain chronological relationships. Sardinian Bronze Age culture, particularly during the Nuragic period, demonstrates sophisticated metallurgical capabilities and warrior traditions that could plausibly be connected to Sherden military expertise. The island's numerous nuragi, stone tower fortifications dating to the 2nd millennium BC, indicate communities organised for warfare and territorial defence. These structures, built using advanced dry stone construction techniques, required coordinated labour forces and engineering knowledge that suggests complex social organisation and military traditions. Bronze figurines from Sardinian archaeological contexts depict warriors equipped with distinctive weapons and armour that show some similarities to Egyptian depictions of Sherden fighters. These bronze sculptures, dating to the late 2nd and early 1st millennia BC, feature warriors carrying round shields, wearing horned helmets, and equipped with bronze swords and spears. While these artistic depictions post-date the documented appearances of Sherden in Egyptian sources, they may reflect cultural traditions that preserve memories of earlier warrior practices and equipment. Metallurgical analysis of Sardinian bronze objects reveals sophisticated alloying techniques and production methods that could have provided the technological foundation for Sherden military capabilities. Sardinian bronzesmiths produced weapons and tools using advanced techniques including lost wax casting, pattern welding, and decorative inlaying that created objects of exceptional quality. The island's copper deposits and strategic position in the Western Mediterranean would have provided both raw materials and commercial opportunities that could have supported warrior communities engaged in maritime raiding and mercenary service. However, the The geographical distance between Sardinia and the eastern Mediterranean regions where Sherden are documented creates chronological and logistical challenges for direct identification. The transportation of substantial warrior populations from Sardinia to the Levant would have required maritime capabilities and organisational resources that may have exceeded the capacities of Bronze Age communities. Alternative theories suggest that Sherden may have been a generic Egyptian term for Western Mediterranean peoples, rather than a specific ethnic designation, or that the name reflects linguistic coincidence rather than historical connection. The Luca present perhaps the strongest case for direct identification with a known historical population, as their name corresponds closely to ancient Lycia in southwestern Anatolia. Egyptian and Hittite sources document Luca peoples in Anatolian contexts throughout the Late Bronze Age, establishing their geographical origins and cultural characteristics decades before their appearance as Sea Peoples participants. This documentation provides a clear historical trajectory that connects the Lucas' pre-migration homeland with their later roles in maritime raiding coalitions. Hittite archives from Hattusa contain numerous references to conflicts with Luca peoples during the 14th and 13th centuries BC, describing them as skilled warriors who specialized in mountain warfare and naval operations. These documents identify Luca territory as encompassing the rugged coastal and highland regions of southwestern Anatolia, areas that would have provided natural training grounds for the military skills that made them valuable allies and dangerous enemies. The persistent Hittite difficulties in controlling Luca territories suggest communities with strong warrior traditions and effective resistance strategies. Archaeological evidence from Lycian sites reveals material culture patterns consistent with the military capabilities attributed to Luca peoples in contemporary sources. Fortified settlements throughout the region show evidence of sophisticated defensive planning and construction techniques that reflect communities organised for warfare. Bronze weapons and armour from Lycian archaeological contexts demonstrate metallurgical expertise and weapon design innovations that would have provided significant military advantages during Bronze Age conflicts. Lycian rock-cut tombs and other mortuary monuments reveal cultural traditions that emphasised warrior identity and martial achievement. These elaborate burial installations, carved into cliffsides and decorated with relief sculptures, frequently depict armed warriors and battle scenes that celebrate military prowess and heroic achievement. The investment of resources and labour required for these monuments indicates communities that valued warrior status and maintained cultural memories of military traditions across multiple generations. The linguistic evidence connecting Luca to later Lycian populations provides additional support for historical continuity. Lycian inscriptions from the first millennium BC, written in an Indo-European language related to Hittite and other Anatolian languages, preserve personal names and place names that show connections to earlier Luca designations documented in Bronze Age sources. This linguistic continuity suggests that Lycian communities maintain cultural and ethnic identities that derive from their Bronze Age predecessors, despite the political and social disruptions of the Late Bronze Age collapse. The linguistic analysis of Sea Peoples' names has generated extensive scholarly investigation aimed at determining their ethnic and geographical origins. The preservation of these names in Egyptian hieroglyphic transcriptions provides valuable evidence for their original pronunciation and linguistic characteristics, though the limitations of hieroglyphic writing systems create uncertainties in phonetic reconstruction. Comparative analysis with known Indo-European, Anatolian, and Aegean languages has produced various proposed etymologies that suggest different possible origins for Sea Peoples groups. Indo-European linguistic connections appear particularly strong for several Sea Peoples names. The Denian show possible connections to Greek Danaoi, a Homeric term for Greeks that may preserve Bronze Age ethnic designations. This identification would place the Danaan within the broader context of Aegean population movements following the collapse of Mycenaean civilization. Similarly, the Ekwesh have been connected to Homeric Achaeans, another Greek ethnic designation that could reflect the participation of mainland Greek populations in Sea Peoples movements. Anatolian linguistic connections provide alternative explanations for several Sea Peoples names. The Teresh show possible relationships to Taruiza, a Bronze Age name for Troy that appears in Hittite sources. This connection would place the Teresh within the context of northwestern Anatolian population movements following the destruction of Troy and other regional centres. The Weshesh similarly show potential connections to Anatolian place names and ethnic designations that would locate their origins within the broader Hittite sphere of influence. The debate over Sea Peoples' political and social organisation centres on fundamental questions about their nature as historical phenomena. Some scholars argue for unified confederations that maintained coordinated leadership structures and strategic objectives across multiple campaigns and geographical regions. This interpretation emphasises the apparent coordination of Sea Peoples' attacks, their consistent military capabilities, and their ability to conduct complex operations requiring substantial logistical support and planning. Evidence supporting confederation theories includes the consistent appearance of multiple Sea Peoples groups in Egyptian sources, suggesting maintained alliances and cooperative relationships. The tactical coordination demonstrated during battles with Egyptian forces indicates command structures capable of integrating diverse military traditions and capabilities into effective combined operations. The persistence of Sea Peoples' activities across multiple decades suggests organisational continuity that would have required stable leadership institutions and shared strategic objectives. Alternative interpretations characterise Sea Peoples as disparate refugee groups driven by desperation rather than unified by common political purposes. This perspective emphasises the displacement and destruction that characterised the Late Bronze Age collapse, arguing that population movements reflected communities fleeing disaster rather than pursuing coordinated conquest strategies. The diversity of Sea Peoples' material culture, military equipment, and settlement patterns supports interpretations that emphasise their heterogeneous character rather than unified organisation. Archaeological evidence from Sea Peoples settlement areas reveals patterns that support both interpretations depending on specific contexts and chronological periods. Early settlement phases often show evidence of coordinated planning and resource allocation that suggests organised leadership and shared objectives. Later periods frequently reveal increasing cultural divergence and localisation that indicates the breakdown of broader cooperative relationships as communities adapted to their new circumstances. The opportunistic raider interpretation provides a third perspective that characterises Sea Peoples as maritime warrior communities that exploited the collapse of Bronze Age political systems for economic and territorial gain. This approach emphasises the military capabilities and maritime expertise that enabled Sea Peoples groups to conduct profitable raiding operations while avoiding the risks associated with direct territorial conquest. The flexibility and adaptability demonstrated by Sea Peoples communities supports interpretations that emphasise their pragmatic responses to changing circumstances rather than ideologically driven expansion programs. Regional variations in Sea Peoples' activities and settlement patterns provide evidence for all three interpretational approaches. Some areas show evidence of coordinated military campaigns and planned settlement programs that suggest confederation-level organisation and strategic planning. Other regions reveal patterns of desperate refugee settlement and defensive community formation that reflect displacement pressures rather than expansionist objectives. Still, other contexts show evidence of opportunistic exploitation of local weaknesses and commercial opportunities that indicates pragmatic adaptation to available circumstances. The military defeats inflicted by Ramses III's forces mark the end of large-scale Sea Peoples invasions, but not their disappearance from the historical record. Rather than retreating to their mysterious homelands or dissolving into obscurity, these displaced populations established permanent settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean, fundamentally altering the demographic and cultural landscape of the region. The most successful and archaeologically visible of these settlement efforts occurred in the southern Levant, where the Peleset transformed themselves into the Philistines, creating a distinctive urban civilization that would dominate the coastal plain for centuries. The establishment of Philistine city-states in the southern Levant represents one of the most remarkable examples of successful cultural adaptation and political organization in the ancient world. Rather than attempting to recreate their lost Bronze Age homelands, these former sea peoples developed new forms of urban organization that combined elements from their Aegean heritage with practical adaptations to Levantine conditions. Archaeological excavations at Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron and Gath reveal sophisticated urban planning that incorporated advanced drainage systems, specialized craft production areas, and defensive installations designed to protect thriving commercial centers. Gaza emerged as the northernmost of the major Philistine centers, strategically positioned to control trade routes connecting Egypt with the Levantine interior. Excavations in the city's ancient quarters have uncovered substantial mud brick architecture dating to the 12th century BC, including large residential complexes with interior courtyards, storage facilities, and workshop areas. The pottery assemblages from these early levels demonstrate the technological continuity that connected Philistine ceramic traditions to their Mycenaean predecessors, while showing rapid adaptation to local clay sources and functional requirements. The urban layout of early Gaza reveals planning principles that differed significantly from traditional Canaanite city organization. Streets followed more regular patterns than typically found in Bronze Age Levantine settlements, with evidence of centralized planning that allocated specific areas for different economic activities. Metalworking installations clustered in designated quarters where prevailing winds carried smoke away from residential areas, while pottery production facilities concentrated near water sources and clay deposits. This systematic approach to urban organization suggests that communities with administrative experience and technical knowledge derived from their Bronze Age urban backgrounds. Ashkelon developed into the largest and most prosperous of the Philistine city-states, with archaeological evidence revealing a settlement covering over 60 hectares at its peak. The city's strategic position on the Mediterranean coast provided access to maritime trade networks, while its agricultural hinterland supported substantial population growth. Excavations directed by Lawrence Steger and his team uncovered extensive remains of Philistine period occupation, including monumental architecture, industrial installations, and residential quarters that demonstrate the community's rapid economic development following initial settlement. The material culture recovered from Ashkelon provides detailed insights into Philistine daily life and cultural practices during the early settlement period. Cooking pots with distinctive rim forms and surface treatments show clear derivation from Aegean prototypes, but manufactured using local clays and adapted to Levantine cooking practices. Storage jars display similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation, with vessel forms that maintained proportional relationships characteristic of Mycenaean pottery traditions, while incorporating functional modifications suited to local storage requirements. Architectural remains at Ashkelon reveal construction techniques that combined knowledge of Aegean building traditions with practical adaptations to local materials and environmental conditions. Foundation systems utilized stone construction methods that reflected understanding of Mediterranean seismic conditions, while superstructures employed mud brick techniques that provided effective insulation against the region's climate extremes. The integration of these different technological traditions produced building styles that were distinctively Philistine, while remaining functionally adapted to their new geographical setting. Ashdod's archaeological record documents the transformation of a modest Bronze Age settlement into a major Philistine urban centre during the 12th and 11th centuries BC. Excavations by Moshe Dotan revealed extensive evidence of Philistine occupation, including substantial architectural remains, pottery assemblages, and craft production facilities that demonstrate the community's rapid economic and demographic growth. The site's strategic position controlling inland trade routes complemented its role in maritime commerce, creating economic opportunities that supported urban development on an unprecedented scale for the region. The pottery workshops discovered at Ashdod provide exceptional evidence for Philistine ceramic production techniques and their evolution over time. Early kilns show construction methods that replicated Aegean pottery firing technologies, including updraft designs and temperature control systems that enabled the production of high-quality ceramics. The gradual modification of these installations over successive generations reveals technological adaptation as Philistine potters learned to work with local clay sources and developed new vessel forms suited to regional market demands. Philistine religious architecture at Ashdod demonstrates the complex cultural synthesis that characterized these communities. Temple installations combined elements from Aegean religious traditions with adaptations to Levantine cult practices, creating hybrid forms that serve the spiritual needs of culturally diverse populations. Cult objects recovered from these contexts include both imported items that maintain connections to pre-migration religious traditions and locally produced pieces that show influence from Canaanite iconographic traditions. Ekron, identified with the archaeological site of Tel Mikne, represents perhaps the most completely excavated Philistine city, providing comprehensive evidence for urban development, economic specialization, and cultural change over several centuries of occupation. The site's excavation by Trude Dothain and Seymour Gitan revealed extensive remains of Philistine period settlement, including residential quarters, industrial areas, and public buildings that document the community's evolution from initial settlement through its eventual integration into broader regional political systems. The olive oil production facilities at Ekron demonstrate the economic specialization that enabled Philistine communities to achieve prosperity in their new homeland. Archaeological evidence reveals over 100 olive oil installations dating to the 7th century BC, making Ekron the largest known olive oil production center in the ancient world. These facilities utilized advanced pressing technologies that combined traditional Mediterranean olive processing techniques with innovations that maximize production efficiency and product quality. The scale of olive oil production at Ekron indicates commercial operations that extended far beyond local consumption needs, suggesting extensive trade networks that connected Philistine communities with markets throughout the region. Storage facilities at the site could accommodate thousands of litres of processed oil, while standardized jar forms found throughout the Levant bear inscriptions that identify Ekron as their place of origin. This commercial success demonstrates the economic adaptation strategies that enabled Philistine communities to transform from displaced refugees into prosperous urban populations. Gath, the largest of the Philistine cities according to biblical sources, has been identified with the archaeological site of Tel Es Safi, where ongoing excavations by Aaron Meir continue to reveal evidence of Philistine occupation and cultural development. The site's strategic position controlling routes between the coastal plain and the Judean hills made it a crucial centre for both commercial and military activities. Archaeological remains include substantial fortification walls, residential quarters, and craft production areas that demonstrate the community's military capabilities and economic prosperity. The fortification systems at Gath reveal sophisticated understanding of defensive architecture that combined elements from different military engineering traditions. Wall construction techniques show influence from both Aegean and Near Eastern fortification practices, creating defensive systems that incorporated the most effective elements from each tradition. These installations required substantial labour investments and technical expertise, indicating communities with the organisational capabilities and resources necessary for major construction projects. Archaeological evidence of Philistine material culture extends beyond the 5 major city-states to include numerous smaller settlements throughout the southern Levant. These sites reveal the broader scope of Philistine settlement and the gradual cultural transformation that occurred as these communities adapted to their new homeland. Pottery assemblages from smaller sites show similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation found at the major centres, while architectural remains demonstrate the widespread adoption of hybrid building techniques that combined Aegean and Levantine traditions. Mycenaean 3C pottery traditions provide the clearest archaeological marker for tracing Philistine cultural origins and development. These ceramic styles, characterized by distinctive decorative motifs, vessel forms, and production techniques, appear throughout Philistine settlement areas during the 12th century BC before gradually evolving into localized variants that incorporated regional influences. The persistence of specific decorative elements, including bird motifs, geometric patterns, and painted designs, demonstrates cultural continuity that connected Philistine communities to their Aegean heritage across multiple generations. The cooking pot traditions that emerged in Philistine settlements represent another clear indicator of cultural continuity and adaptation. These vessels, characterized by distinctive rim forms, handle attachments, and surface treatments, show clear derivation from Aegean prototypes, while demonstrating adaptation to local cooking practices and available raw materials. The evolution of these vessel forms over time reveals the gradual cultural synthesis that characterized Philistine communities as they integrated elements from their heritage with influences from their new environment. Architectural features found at Philistine sites demonstrate similar patterns of cultural continuity and adaptation. Hearth installations in residential buildings show clear connections to Aegean domestic traditions, including central placement within rooms and construction techniques that reflected understanding of Mediterranean heating requirements. However, these installations were modified to accommodate local fuel sources and adapted to building materials available in the Levant, creating hybrid forms that served practical needs while maintaining cultural connections to ancestral traditions. Beyond the well-documented Philistine settlements, archaeological evidence reveals other Sea Peoples groups establishing communities throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The Cheka, mentioned in Egyptian sources as participants in the Sea Peoples coalitions, appear to have established settlements along the Levantine coast, with the most significant concentration at Dora. This strategic port city, located on the Mediterranean coast south of modern Haifa, became a major commercial centre under Cheka control, developing extensive trade networks that connected the Levant with Cyprus, Anatolia, and the Aegean. Excavations at Dor by Ephraim Stern revealed substantial remains of Iron Age occupation that show clear connections to Sea Peoples' material culture traditions. Pottery assemblages from the site include vessels that demonstrate technological and stylistic connections to Aegean ceramic traditions, while architectural remains show building techniques that combined elements from different Mediterranean construction traditions. The site's development into a major commercial centre demonstrates the economic success achieved by Cheka communities in their new homeland. The harbour installations at Dor reveal advanced understanding of maritime engineering that enabled the community to develop extensive commercial operations. Archaeological evidence includes stone quays, breakwater systems, and warehouse facilities that could accommodate substantial shipping operations. These installations required significant technical expertise and labour investments, indicating communities with the organisational capabilities and resources necessary for major infrastructure projects. Cheka material culture at Dor shows patterns similar to those observed in Philistine settlements, with clear evidence of cultural continuity from Aegean traditions combined with adaptation to local conditions. Pottery production techniques maintained technological elements derived from Bronze Age traditions while adapting to local clay sources and market requirements. Metalworking installations show similar patterns, with production techniques that combined knowledge from multiple technological traditions to create products suited to regional needs and preferences. The possible connection between the Sherden and Sardinian populations remains one of the most intriguing but problematic aspects of Sea People's research. Archaeological evidence from Sardinia during the Late Bronze Age reveals communities with sophisticated metallurgical capabilities, warrior traditions, and maritime expertise that could plausibly be connected to the Sherden documented in Egyptian sources. However, the geographical distance between Sardinia and the Eastern Mediterranean, combined with limited archaeological evidence for direct connections, makes definitive identification problematic. Sardinian Nuragic culture during the 2nd millennium BC demonstrates technological and social characteristics that show some similarities to capabilities attributed to Sherden warriors. The island's numerous stone tower fortifications indicate communities organised for warfare and territorial defence, while bronze figurines from archaeological contexts depict warriors equipped with distinctive weapons and armour. These cultural elements could provide the background for warrior populations capable of participating in the maritime raiding and mercenary activities associated with Sea People's groups. Metallurgical evidence from Sardinian Bronze Age contexts reveals sophisticated production techniques that could have provided the technological foundation for Sherden military capabilities. Bronze weapons and tools from the island demonstrate advanced alloying techniques, decorative inlaying, and functional design innovations that created products of exceptional quality. The island's copper resources and strategic position in the Western Mediterranean would have provided both raw materials and commercial opportunities that could have supported warrior communities engaged in long-distance military activities. The Denian present another complex case for Sea People's identification, with proposed connections to the Danuna people documented in late Bronze Age sources from Cilicia in southeastern Anatolia. This identification would place the Danaan within the broader context of Anatolian population movements following the collapse of Hittite imperial control, connecting them to established historical populations with documented geographical origins and cultural characteristics. Archaeological evidence from Cilician sites reveals communities that possessed advanced metallurgical capabilities, maritime expertise, and commercial connections that could have provided the foundation for participation in Sea People's activities. The region's strategic position controlling routes between Anatolia and the Levant made it a crucial centre for both commercial and military activities, while its harbours provided access to Mediterranean trade networks and naval operations. The gradual assimilation of Sea People's communities into local populations represents one of the most significant long-term consequences of their settlement in the Eastern Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence reveals cultural synthesis processes that occurred over multiple generations as these displaced populations adapted to their new homelands, while contributing their own technological and cultural innovations to regional development. This assimilation process varied significantly depending on local conditions, community size, and the nature of interactions with established populations. Philistine communities provide the clearest evidence for assimilation processes, with archaeological sequences that document gradual cultural change over several centuries of settlement. Early phases show strong continuity with Aegean material culture traditions, while later periods reveal increasing influence from local Canaanite and other regional cultures. This cultural synthesis produced distinctive hybrid traditions that combined elements from multiple sources while maintaining recognizable connections to their various origins. Religious practices show particularly clear evidence of cultural synthesis and adaptation. Philistine cult installations combine architectural elements from Aegean religious traditions with iconographic and ritual elements derived from Canaanite religious practices. Cult objects from these contexts include both imported items that maintained connections to ancestral traditions and locally produced pieces that show influence from regional iconographic systems. This religious synthesis enabled Philistine communities to maintain cultural identity while adapting to the spiritual landscape of their new homeland. The transformation of the Sea Peoples from maritime raiders into settled communities created a remarkable period of technological and cultural innovation that would reshape the Eastern Mediterranean world for centuries. The displaced populations who established themselves in territories from the Levantine coast to Sardinia brought with them not merely the remnants of Bronze Age civilization, but active traditions of craftsmanship, metallurgy, and urban organization that would catalyze fundamental changes in regional development. Archaeological evidence reveals that these communities served as crucial agents in the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age technologies, while simultaneously creating new forms of cultural expression that synthesized elements from their diverse origins with innovations developed in their new homelands. The ironworking capabilities introduced by Sea Peoples communities represented perhaps their most significant technological contribution to the regions they settled. While iron technology had existed in limited forms during the Late Bronze Age, the collapse of established copper and tin trade networks made bronze increasingly difficult to produce in the quantities required for tools and weapons. Sea Peoples groups, particularly those with origins in Anatolian regions, where early iron smelting techniques had developed, possessed knowledge of ore processing and metalworking methods that enabled them to exploit local iron deposits more effectively than established populations. Archaeological evidence from Philistine sites reveals sophisticated iron production facilities that demonstrate advanced understanding of smelting techniques and heat management. Excavations at Tel Mikn Ekron uncovered furnace installations dating to the 11th century BC that show construction methods specifically designed for iron working. These facilities featured stone-lined combustion chambers with carefully designed airflow systems that could achieve the temperatures necessary for effective iron smelting. The furnaces incorporated bellows systems using leather bags operated by foot pedals, enabling metal workers to maintain consistent heat levels during extended smelting operations. The iron objects produced in these Philistine workshops revealed technological sophistication that exceeded contemporary regional capabilities. Agricultural implements including ploughshares, sickles, and hoes show advanced forging techniques that created tools with hardened cutting edges and more durable construction than bronze equivalents. The superior performance of these iron tools enabled more efficient agricultural practices, contributing to increased food production that supported growing urban populations in Philistine territories. Military applications of iron technology provided Philistine communities with significant tactical advantages during conflicts with neighbouring populations, still relying primarily on bronze weapons. Iron sword blades found at Philistine sites demonstrate advanced metallurgical techniques, including differential hardening, where cutting edges were made harder than blade cores to combine sharpness with flexibility. Spear points show similar technological sophistication, with socketed construction that provided stronger hafting than traditional bronze weapons, while maintaining lighter weight for improved handling. The production techniques employed in Philistine metalworking facilities reveal knowledge derived from multiple technological traditions. Furnace construction methods show influence from both Aegean and Anatolian metallurgical practices, while tool designs combine functional elements from different regional traditions. This technological synthesis enabled Philistine craftsmen to develop innovative solutions that improved upon their ancestral techniques while adapting to locally available materials and market demands. Pottery production in Sea People settlements demonstrates similar patterns of technological innovation and cultural synthesis. The ceramic traditions established by Philistine communities combined advanced wheel-throwing techniques derived from Mycenaean pottery traditions, with decorative styles that incorporated elements from Canaanite, Cypriot, and other regional ceramic systems. This synthesis produced distinctive pottery styles that serve both functional and cultural purposes, enabling communities to maintain connections to their heritage while adapting to local preferences and requirements. The technical aspects of Philistine pottery production reveal sophisticated understanding of ceramic technology that exceeded many contemporary regional capabilities. Kilns discovered at Ashkelon and other Philistine sites show advanced construction techniques that enable precise temperature control and efficient fuel consumption. These installations featured updraft designs with separate combustion and firing chambers, allowing potters to achieve consistent firing conditions that produced high-quality ceramics with uniform coloration and durability. Decorative techniques employed by Philistine potters demonstrate remarkable artistic innovation that combined motifs from multiple cultural sources. Bird representations derived from Mycenaean artistic traditions appear alongside geometric patterns that show influence from Cypriot and Levantine decorative systems. The integration of these different artistic elements created distinctive decorative styles that were recognizably Philistine while remaining accessible to regional populations with different cultural backgrounds. Vessel forms produced in Philistine workshops show similar patterns of cultural synthesis and functional adaptation. Cooking pots maintained proportional relationships characteristic of Aegean ceramic traditions while incorporating rim forms and handle configurations that reflected adaptation to local cooking practices. Storage jars combined Mycenaean volumetric standards with construction techniques that utilize local clay sources and firing methods, creating containers that serve both practical storage needs and cultural identity functions. The distribution of Philistine pottery throughout the southern Levant reveals extensive trade networks that connected Sea Peoples communities with regional markets. Archaeological surveys have identified Philistine ceramic products at sites throughout the coastal plain and inland valleys, indicating commercial relationships that extended far beyond the immediate settlement areas. This commercial success demonstrates the economic advantages provided by superior production techniques and the market appeal of innovative decorative styles. Architectural innovations introduced by Sea Peoples communities reflect similar patterns of technological transfer and cultural adaptation. Building techniques employed in Philistine settlements combined construction methods derived from Aegean traditions with adaptations to local materials and environmental conditions. The result was distinctive architectural styles that provided improved functionality while maintaining cultural connections to ancestral building traditions. Foundation systems used in Philistine construction demonstrate advanced understanding of structural engineering that reflected knowledge gained from building in seismically active Mediterranean regions. Stone foundations extended deeper than typical in Canaanite construction, with careful attention to drainage systems that prevented water damage to mud brick superstructures. These technical improvements enabled the construction of larger and more durable buildings that could accommodate growing urban populations and expanding commercial activities. Interior space organization in Philistine buildings shows influence from Aegean domestic architecture, while adapting to Levantine climate conditions and social practices. Central hearth installations maintained connections to ancestral traditions, while being modified to accommodate local fuel sources and cooking practices. Room arrangements provided improved ventilation and temperature control compared to traditional Canaanite domestic architecture, creating more comfortable living conditions that contributed to community health and productivity. Public architecture in Philistine settlements reveals sophisticated urban planning capabilities that combined elements from different Mediterranean urban traditions. Temple complexes show architectural elements derived from both Aegean and Near Eastern religious building traditions, creating hybrid forms that serve the spiritual needs of culturally diverse populations. Administrative buildings demonstrate knowledge of palace architecture that enabled effective governance of complex urban communities while adapting to local political and social requirements. The religious and cultural syncretism that developed in Sea People settlements represents one of the most fascinating aspects of their cultural legacy. Archaeological evidence reveals complex processes of religious adaptation that enabled displaced populations to maintain spiritual connections to their ancestral traditions while integrating elements from local religious systems. This syncretistic approach created new forms of religious expression that served the needs of culturally diverse communities while contributing to broader regional religious development. Cult installations at Philistine sites demonstrate architectural synthesis that combined elements from Aegean religious building traditions with features derived from Canaanite temple architecture. The temple at Tel Kasile shows a rectangular plan with central hearth installation that reflects Aegean religious architectural traditions, while incorporating cult installations and decorative elements that show influence from local religious practices. This hybrid architecture enabled religious observances that satisfied both ancestral spiritual traditions and local religious expectations. Religious iconography found at Sea People sites reveals similar patterns of cultural synthesis and adaptation. Figurines and cult objects combine artistic elements from multiple sources, creating distinctive religious art that served the spiritual needs of culturally diverse populations. Female figurines show influence from both Aegean goddess traditions and Canaanite fertility cult practices, while male warrior figurines demonstrate the continued importance of martial identity within Sea People's religious systems. Burial practices documented at Sea People cemeteries provide detailed evidence of religious syncretism and cultural adaptation processes. The cemetery at Ashkelon contains both cremation and inhumation burials that reflect the accommodation of different cultural traditions within single communities. Grave goods combine objects that maintain connections to ancestral traditions with locally produced items that show adaptation to regional customs and available materials. Cremation burials at Philistine sites demonstrate the persistence of Aegean religious traditions while showing adaptation to local conditions and materials. Ceramic urns used for cremated remains show distinctive forms that derive from Mycenaean pottery traditions, while being manufactured using local clays and firing techniques. The placement of these burials within cemetery areas shows integration with local burial customs while maintaining distinctive practices that preserved cultural identity. Artistic influences visible in pottery, figurines, and decorative motifs reveal the extensive cultural exchange that characterized Sea People settlements. Decorative elements spread through trade networks and cultural contact, influencing artistic development throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The distinctive artistic styles developed by Sea People's communities contributed to broader regional artistic traditions, while maintaining recognizable connections to their diverse origins. Pottery painting techniques developed in Philistine workshops influenced ceramic production throughout the southern Levant. The use of red and black painted designs on buff-coloured pottery surfaces created distinctive decorative effects that were adopted by local potters and adapted to regional preferences. These techniques spread through commercial networks and cultural contact, contributing to the development of new regional pottery styles that combined elements from multiple artistic traditions. Figurine production in Sea People settlements demonstrates similar patterns of artistic innovation and cultural influence. The distinctive female figurines produced at Philistine sites combined artistic elements from Aegean and Near Eastern traditions, creating new iconographic forms that influenced religious art throughout the region. These figurines show advanced modelling techniques that produced more naturalistic representations than many contemporary regional examples, contributing to artistic developments that would influence Mediterranean art for centuries. Decorative metalwork produced by Sea People's craftsmen reveals sophisticated artistic capabilities that combine technical excellence with innovative design elements. Bronze vessels and weapons show decorative inlays, pattern welding, and surface treatments that demonstrate advanced metallurgical artistry. These techniques influenced metalworking traditions throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, contributing to the development of new decorative styles that combined functional effectiveness with artistic excellence. The role of Sea Peoples in facilitating the transition from Bronze Age to Iron Age social structures extends beyond technological contributions to encompass fundamental changes in political organization, economic systems, and social relationships. The communities established by these displaced populations developed new forms of urban organization that adapted Bronze Age institutional knowledge to the changed conditions of the early Iron Age world. Political structures developed in Sea People settlements show adaptation from Bronze Age palace systems to more decentralized forms of governance that reflected the reduced scale and resources of Iron Age communities. Archaeological evidence suggests that Philistine city-states maintained elements of centralized authority while developing more flexible administrative systems that could respond effectively to local conditions and regional challenges. Economic organization in Sea People settlements demonstrates innovation in commercial practices and production systems that contributed to regional economic development. The specialized craft production documented at sites like Ekron shows advanced understanding of market economics and commercial organization that enabled communities to achieve prosperity through trade and manufacturing rather than relying solely on agricultural production or tribute extraction. Social organization within Sea Peoples communities appears to have maintained elements of Bronze Age social hierarchy while adapting to the demographic and resource constraints of their new circumstances. Archaeological evidence suggests the persistence of warrior elites alongside the development of merchant classes and specialized craftsmen who contributed to community prosperity and cultural development. The technological innovations, cultural synthesis, and institutional adaptations developed by Sea Peoples communities created lasting legacies that influenced Mediterranean civilization for centuries. Their contributions to ironworking technology, pottery production, architectural design, and artistic expression provided foundations for cultural developments that would shape the ancient world throughout the Iron Age and beyond. The successful adaptation of these displaced populations to their new homelands demonstrated remarkable cultural resilience and innovative capacity that enabled them to transform from refugees into creators of distinctive and influential civilizations. The collapse of Bronze Age civilization and the subsequent settlement of Sea Peoples throughout the Eastern Mediterranean created a massive power vacuum that fundamentally altered the political landscape of the ancient world. The destruction of major urban centres, the breakdown of established trade networks, and the displacement of entire populations left vast territories without effective governance or economic organisation. This unprecedented disruption provided opportunities for emerging powers to expand their influence while simultaneously forcing existing states to adapt their strategies and institutions to survive in a radically transformed environment. The Neo-Assyrian Empire emerged as the primary beneficiary of this regional chaos, exploiting the weakness of traditional rivals to establish unprecedented territorial control across Mesopotamia and beyond. During the reigns of Tiglath-Pileser I and his successors, Assyrian forces systematically occupied territories previously controlled by the Hittite Empire, Mitanni, and various Aramean kingdoms. The Assyrian military machine, already formidable during the Middle Assyrian period, adapted its tactics and organisation to exploit the opportunities created by Bronze Age collapse, while developing new administrative systems capable of governing the diverse populations brought under imperial control. Assyrian expansion during this period differed significantly from earlier Mesopotamian imperial ventures in both scale and systematic organisation. Previous empires had typically focused on extracting tribute from subject territories while leaving local administrative structures largely intact. The Neo-Assyrian approach involved direct territorial administration, population deportations, and cultural assimilation policies designed to create lasting imperial control rather than temporary hegemony. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout the expanding Assyrian sphere reveals standardized administrative practices, architectural styles, and material culture patterns that demonstrate the empire's systematic approach to territorial integration. The Assyrian military innovations that enabled this expansion incorporated lessons learned from encounters with sea peoples and other displaced populations. Iron weapons became standard equipment for Assyrian forces decades before their widespread adoption elsewhere, providing tactical advantages that proved decisive in campaigns against opponents still relying primarily on bronze armaments. Assyrian siege warfare techniques evolved to counter the improved fortification methods developed by communities seeking protection during the post-collapse period, incorporating specialized equipment and tactical approaches that could overcome even the most sophisticated defensive installations. Administrative reforms implemented by Neo-Assyrian rulers created governmental systems capable of managing territories spanning from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean coast. Provincial governors appointed directly by the king replaced local rulers in conquered territories, while standardized taxation systems extracted resources needed to support the empire's military and administrative apparatus. Deportation policies systematically relocated skilled craftsmen, agricultural workers, and potential rebel leaders to different regions within the empire, breaking down local loyalties while distributing valuable human resources where they were most needed. The cultural impact of Neo-Assyrian expansion extended far beyond political control to encompass fundamental changes in religious practices, artistic traditions, and technological development throughout the region. Assyrian royal ideology, which portrayed the king as the earthly representative of the god Ashur, with divine mandate to rule all lands, provided justification for unlimited territorial expansion while creating cultural frameworks that legitimized imperial authority. This ideological system influenced political thought throughout the ancient Near East, establishing precedents for imperial legitimacy that would persist for centuries. Simultaneously, the collapse of Bronze Age maritime networks created opportunities for Phoenician city-states to establish unprecedented commercial dominance throughout the Mediterranean. The destruction of major trading centres like Ugarit eliminated established competitors, while the breakdown of centralised political control in many regions created demand for the commercial services that Phoenician merchants could provide. Cities like Tyre, Sidon and Byblos transformed from regional trading centres into the nuclei of commercial networks that would eventually span from the Atlantic coast of Iberia to the Black Sea shores of Anatolia. Phoenician maritime technology during this period incorporated innovations developed in response to the changed conditions of post-collapse Mediterranean commerce. Ships designed for long-distance voyaging featured improved hull construction, more efficient sail configurations, and specialized cargo handling equipment that enabled profitable operations across vast distances. Archaeological evidence from shipwrecks and harbour installations reveals vessels capable of carrying substantial cargoes while maintaining the speed and manoeuvrability necessary for successful commercial operations in waters that often lacked effective political control. The establishment of Phoenician trading posts and colonies throughout the Mediterranean created new forms of commercial organisation that differed fundamentally from Bronze Age trade patterns. Rather than relying on diplomatic relationships between major powers to facilitate commerce, Phoenician merchants developed independent commercial networks based on permanent settlements that could provide secure bases for trading operations. These installations, ranging from simple warehousing facilities to fully developed urban centres, created infrastructure that supported regular commercial contact between distant regions while providing security for valuable cargoes and personnel. Carthage, established by Tyrian colonists during the 9th century BC, exemplifies the success of this Phoenician commercial strategy. Archaeological excavations in the city's earliest levels reveal sophisticated urban planning that incorporated harbour installations, residential quarters, and craft production areas designed to support both local populations and visiting merchants. the city's rapid growth from a modest trading post to a major regional power demonstrates the economic opportunities created by the collapse of Bronze Age political systems and the effectiveness of Phoenician adaptation to changed circumstances. Phoenician influence on Mediterranean cultural development extended far beyond commercial activities to encompass fundamental innovations in writing systems, religious practices, and artistic traditions. The alphabetic script developed by Phoenician scribes provided a more efficient and accessible writing system than the complex syllabic and logographic scripts used during the Bronze Age. This innovation democratized literacy by making written communication available to broader segments of society, while facilitating commercial record-keeping and long-distance correspondence essential for Mediterranean-wide trade networks. The Greek world experienced perhaps the most dramatic transformation during the post-collapse period, as the destruction of Mycenaean palace states created conditions that would eventually give rise to the distinctive polis system that characterized classical Greek civilization. The collapse of centralized authority, the breakdown of administrative systems, and the massive population decline that followed the Bronze Age catastrophe forced surviving communities to develop new forms of political and social organization adapted to their reduced circumstances and available resources. Archaeological evidence from Greek sites during the early Iron Age reveals communities that had abandoned the large urban centres characteristic of Mycenaean civilization in favour of smaller settlements that could be more easily defended and supplied. These early Iron Age communities typically occupied hilltop locations with natural defensive advantages, while their material culture shows significant simplification compared to Bronze Age standards. Pottery production, metalworking, and architectural construction all show evidence of technological regression as specialized knowledge was lost and communities focused on basic survival rather than cultural elaboration. The gradual recovery of Greek communities during the 10th and 9th centuries BC involved the development of new social and political institutions that would eventually evolve into the classical polis system. Archaeological evidence suggests that these early communities were organized around kinship groups and warrior bands rather than the bureaucratic hierarchies that had characterized Mycenaean palace states. Leadership appears to have been based on personal charisma, military prowess, and the ability to provide security and resources for community members rather than inherited royal authority. The emergence of Greek trading activities during the 8th century BC reflects both recovery from post-collapse conditions and adaptation to new Mediterranean commercial opportunities. Greek merchants established trading relationships with Phoenician commercial networks while developing independent routes that connected the Aegean with markets in Anatolia, the Black Sea region, and eventually the Western Mediterranean. These commercial activities provided access to raw materials and luxury goods that supported community development while creating wealth that enabled political and cultural elaboration. Greek colonization movements beginning in the 8th century BC represent systematic responses to population pressure and resource limitations in the Greek homeland, while simultaneously exploiting commercial opportunities created by post-collapse conditions throughout the Mediterranean. Unlike Phoenician commercial colonies, Greek settlements typically involved the establishment of independent political communities that maintained cultural connections to their mother cities while developing autonomous governmental institutions. This colonization pattern created networks of related but independent communities that would eventually form the foundation of classical Greek civilization. The cultural innovations that emerged from Greek communities during the early Iron Age recovery period included fundamental developments in artistic expression, religious practices, and intellectual traditions that would influence Mediterranean civilization for centuries. The epic poetry attributed to Homer represents literary achievement that synthesized cultural memories of the Bronze Age world with contemporary social values and political ideals. These works preserved knowledge of Bronze Age civilization while adapting it to serve the cultural needs of Iron Age communities, creating literary traditions that would inspire subsequent generations of Greek artists and thinkers. Religious practices that developed in post-collapse Greek communities show similar patterns of cultural synthesis and innovation. The pantheon of Greek gods incorporated deities and mythological traditions from Bronze Age sources while adapting them to serve the spiritual needs of Iron Age communities. Sanctuary sites like Olympia and Delphi became centres of inter-community religious activity that helped maintain cultural connections between dispersed Greek settlements while providing forums for political and commercial interaction. The demographic and cultural changes that occurred in Cyprus, the Levant and Anatolia as direct results of Sea People settlements created lasting transformations that would influence regional development for centuries. In Cyprus, the establishment of Sea Peoples communities alongside existing populations created culturally diverse societies that combined elements from Aegean, Anatolian and local Cypriot traditions. Archaeological evidence from sites like Salamis and Kishon reveals material culture assemblages that demonstrate complex cultural interactions and technological exchange between different population groups. Cypriot copper production, which had been disrupted during the Bronze Age collapse, gradually recovered under new management systems that incorporated technological innovations introduced by Sea Peoples craftsmen. Ironworking techniques enabled more efficient extraction and processing of copper ores, while new smelting methods improved the quality and quantity of metal production. These technological improvements, combined with Cyprus's strategic position in Eastern Mediterranean trade networks, enabled the island to regain its role as a major source of metal for regional markets. The cultural synthesis that occurred in Cyprus created distinctive artistic and architectural traditions that combined elements from multiple sources while adapting to local conditions and preferences. Pottery production shows influence from Aegean, Anatolian, and Levantine ceramic traditions, while maintaining distinctive Cypriot characteristics that reflected local clay sources and firing techniques. Architectural remains reveal building methods that incorporated construction techniques from different Mediterranean traditions, while adapting to local materials and environmental conditions. Religious practices in post-settlement Cyprus demonstrate similar patterns of cultural synthesis, with cult installations that combined architectural elements from different traditions while serving the spiritual needs of culturally diverse populations. The sanctuary at Kishon shows evidence of religious activities that incorporated elements from Phoenician, Greek, and local Cypriot traditions, creating syncretic practices that enabled communities with different cultural backgrounds to participate in shared religious observances. The transformation of trade networks following Sea Peoples settlements and Bronze Age collapse required fundamental changes in commercial organisation and transportation systems throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. The destruction of major trading centres and the breakdown of diplomatic relationships that facilitated Bronze Age commerce forced merchants and communities to develop new approaches to long-distance trade that could function in the absence of centralised political control. Regional trade networks that emerged during the early Iron Age typically operated on smaller scales than their Bronze Age predecessors, connecting neighbouring communities rather than spanning entire regions. Archaeological evidence shows increased importance of local and regional markets, with pottery, metalwork and other manufactured goods showing more limited distribution patterns than comparable Bronze Age products. This localization of commerce reflected both reduced transportation capabilities and the increased risks associated with long-distance travel in politically unstable regions. The gradual recovery of Mediterranean commerce during the 9th and 8th centuries BC involved the development of new commercial practices and institutional arrangements that could function effectively in the changed political environment. Merchant communities established permanent trading posts at strategic locations, creating secure bases for commercial operations while providing services needed by local populations. These installations often evolved into significant urban centres that served as focal points for regional economic development and cultural exchange. Maritime technology improvements during this period enabled more efficient and secure transportation of goods across Mediterranean distances. Ship construction techniques incorporated innovations that improved vessel durability and cargo capacity, while reducing crew requirements and operational costs. Harbour installations at major trading centres featured improved facilities for loading and unloading cargoes, while storage systems provided secure accommodation for valuable goods during extended trading operations. The development of standardized weights, measures and currency systems facilitated commercial transactions between communities with different cultural traditions and governmental systems. Archaeological evidence reveals increasing standardization of pottery vessels, metal ingots, and other trade goods, indicating the emergence of commercial practices that could function across cultural and political boundaries. These standardization efforts reduced transaction costs while increasing the reliability and predictability of commercial relationships. Cultural exchange facilitated by recovering trade networks contributed to the spread of technological innovations, artistic styles, and religious practices throughout the Mediterranean region. The movement of craftsmen, merchants, and other specialists between different communities created opportunities for knowledge transfer that accelerated technological development and cultural elaboration. Pottery production techniques, metalworking methods, and architectural innovations spread through these networks, contributing to regional cultural development while maintaining distinctive local characteristics. The emergence of alphabetic writing systems represents one of the most significant cultural innovations facilitated by post-collapse trade networks. The Phoenician alphabet, developed from earlier writing systems but simplified for commercial use, spread throughout Mediterranean commercial networks where it was adapted to local languages and cultural requirements. This innovation democratized literacy while facilitating the record-keeping and communication necessary for complex commercial operations. Religious ideas and practices also spread through commercial networks, creating opportunities for cultural synthesis and innovation that would influence Mediterranean civilization for centuries. The movement of merchants, craftsmen, and other travelers between different communities facilitated the exchange of religious concepts, mythological traditions, and cult practices that contributed to the development of new forms of religious expression adapted to culturally diverse societies. The systematic study of the Sea Peoples phenomenon began during the 19th century, with the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphic texts and the early archaeological excavations in the eastern Mediterranean. French scholar Jean-François Champollion's breakthrough in reading hieroglyphs during the 1820s first made accessible the detailed Egyptian accounts of conflicts with these mysterious maritime raiders. The Karnak inscriptions of Meneptah and the extensive battle reliefs at Medinet Habu suddenly provided contemporary documentation of events that had previously existed only in fragmentary biblical references and classical authors' distant memories. Early Egyptologists like Gaston Maspero and Heinrich Brugsch approached the Sea Peoples records with the methodological tools of 19th century historical scholarship, focusing primarily on philological analysis of the Egyptian texts and attempts to identify these ancient names with known historical populations. Their work established the basic framework for Sea Peoples research by cataloguing the various group names mentioned in Egyptian sources, analysing the chronological sequence of encounters, and proposing initial theories about their geographical origins based on linguistic similarities with later Mediterranean peoples. The archaeological dimension of Sea Peoples research emerged gradually as excavations throughout the eastern Mediterranean began uncovering material evidence that could be connected to the population movements described in Egyptian texts. William Matthew Flinders, Petrie's excavations in Palestine during the 1890s first identified pottery assemblages that showed clear connections to Aegean ceramic traditions, providing material confirmation that significant population movements from the Aegean region had indeed occurred during the late Bronze Age collapse period. These early archaeological discoveries established pottery analysis as a crucial tool for tracing Sea Peoples movements and settlements. The development of stratigraphic excavation techniques during the early 20th century revolutionized Sea People's research by providing precise chronological frameworks for correlating archaeological evidence with historical sources. Excavations at sites like Tel el-Hesi and Giza revealed destruction layers that could be dated to the period of Sea People's invasions, while associated pottery assemblages provided material evidence for the cultural transformations that accompanied these population movements. This integration of archaeological and textual evidence created more sophisticated analytical frameworks that moved beyond simple name identifications to examine broader patterns of cultural change and adaptation. The interwar period saw significant advances in Sea People's research through large-scale excavations at key sites and the development of ceramic typologies that could trace cultural connections across vast geographical distances. The American excavations at Megiddo, directed by Clarence Fisher and later by Gordon Loud, uncovered extensive remains of late Bronze Age destruction and Iron Age rebuilding that provided detailed evidence for the transition period when Sea People settlements were being established. Similarly, the British excavations at Tel ed-Duer revealed destruction evidence that could be correlated with Egyptian accounts of military campaigns in the Levant. Ceramic analysis during this period became increasingly sophisticated, with scholars like William Foxwell Albright developing detailed typological sequences that could trace the evolution of pottery styles from late Bronze Age Mycenaean prototypes through their transformation in Philistine and other Sea Peoples contexts. These ceramic studies provided crucial evidence for cultural continuity between Aegean populations and Eastern Mediterranean settlements, establishing material foundations for theories about Sea People's origins that went beyond linguistic speculation to encompass tangible archaeological evidence. The post-World War II era brought revolutionary changes to Sea People's research through the application of scientific dating methods, systematic regional surveys, and interdisciplinary approaches that incorporated insights from climatology, anthropology, and other fields. Radiocarbon dating enabled precise chronological frameworks that could correlate destruction events across different sites and regions, revealing the synchronous nature of late Bronze Age collapse and providing temporal precision that had previously been impossible to achieve. Kathleen Kenyon's excavations at Jericho during the 1950s exemplified the new methodological rigour that characterised post-war archaeology, with meticulous stratigraphic recording and comprehensive artefact analysis that provided detailed evidence for cultural transitions during the Sea Peoples period. Her work demonstrated how careful excavation could reveal complex sequences of destruction, abandonment, and resettlement that reflected the turbulent conditions of the late Bronze Age collapse, while providing evidence for the material culture changes that accompanied new population settlements. The discovery and excavation of the Uluburan shipwreck during the 1980s provided unprecedented insights into late Bronze Age maritime trade networks and the international connections that characterized the Mediterranean world before Sea People's disruptions. The wreck's cargo, dating to around 1300 BC, included materials from across the known world, demonstrating the complexity and extent of commercial relationships that would be disrupted by the collapse events. This archaeological evidence provided crucial context for understanding both the scale of the disruption caused by Sea People's activities and the economic foundations that supported their maritime capabilities. Contemporary Sea People's research encompasses multiple competing theoretical frameworks that attempt to explain the origins, motivations, and historical significance of these population movements. The single migration theory, advocated by scholars like Trudy Dothan and others, argues that Sea Peoples represent coordinated population movements from the Aegean region following the collapse of Mycenaean civilization. This interpretation emphasizes the cultural continuities visible in pottery, architecture, and burial practices between Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean contexts, suggesting organised migration by coherent cultural groups seeking new territories after losing their original homelands. Archaeological evidence supporting single migration theories includes the distinctive ceramic assemblages found at Philistine sites, which show clear derivation from Mycenaean 3C pottery traditions while maintaining technological and stylistic consistency across different settlement areas. The architectural remains at sites like Ekron and Ashkelon reveal building techniques that demonstrate knowledge of Aegean construction methods adapted to Levantine conditions, suggesting communities that retained cultural knowledge from their pre-migration homeland while adapting to new environmental circumstances. The multiple waves theory, proposed by scholars like Itamar Singer and others, argues that Sea People's activities represent a series of distinct population movements occurring over several generations rather than a single coordinated migration event. This interpretation emphasises the chronological spread of Sea People's encounters with Egyptian forces, the diversity of material culture traditions found in different settlement contexts, and the varied political and military organisations demonstrated by different groups. The multiple waves approach suggests that economic disruption, political instability, and environmental pressures created conditions that generated repeated episodes of population displacement and maritime raiding over extended periods. Evidence supporting multiple waves theories includes the chronological distribution of Sea People's encounters documented in Egyptian sources, which span several decades and involve different combinations of groups in successive conflicts. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites reveals cultural assemblages that show influences from multiple source regions and different phases of cultural development, suggesting complex migration patterns rather than single coordinated movements. The diversity of settlement strategies and cultural adaptation patterns visible at different sites supports interpretations that emphasize the heterogeneous character of Sea People's movements rather than unified migration events. Climate change theories have gained increasing prominence in Sea People's research as paleoclimatic data has become more sophisticated and comprehensive. Scholars like Brian Fagan and others argue that environmental deterioration during the late 13th century BC created conditions that forced population movements and contributed to the collapse of established political systems throughout the eastern Mediterranean. This approach emphasises the role of drought, temperature fluctuations, and agricultural disruption in creating the economic and social pressures that motivated Sea People's activities. Paleoclimatic evidence supporting environmental theories includes tree ring data from Anatolian sites that reveal prolonged drought conditions during the late 13th century BC, coinciding with the chronological framework for Sea People's activities. Pollen analysis from eastern Mediterranean lake sediments shows vegetation changes consistent with reduced precipitation and increased aridity, while isotopic analysis of marine and terrestrial deposits provides additional evidence for climatic deterioration during this period. These environmental indicators suggest that agricultural disruption and resource scarcity created conditions that forced population movements and contributed to political instability throughout the region. Systems collapse models, developed by scholars like Robert Drews and Eric Klein, argue that Sea People's activities represent symptoms rather than causes of broader systemic breakdown affecting late Bronze Age civilization. This theoretical framework emphasises the interconnected nature of Bronze Age political, economic and social systems, arguing that disruption in any component could trigger cascading failures throughout the entire network. Systems collapse theory suggests that Sea People's movements both resulted from and contributed to the breakdown of established international relationships, trade networks and political institutions. Archaeological evidence supporting systems collapse models includes the synchronous destruction of major urban centres across different regions, the breakdown of standardised pottery production and distribution systems, and the collapse of specialised craft production that characterised late Bronze Age economies. The disruption of copper and tin trade networks that supplied bronze production throughout the Mediterranean demonstrates the interconnected nature of late Bronze Age systems, while the rapid spread of iron technology suggests adaptive responses to the breakdown of established resource supply networks. DNA analysis has emerged as a powerful tool for investigating sea peoples' origins and settlement patterns, though results remain preliminary and sometimes contradictory. Genetic studies of ancient remains from Philistine cemetery sites at Ashkelon have identified European ancestry components that support theories about Aegean origins, while simultaneously revealing complex patterns of population mixing that occurred during the settlement process. These genetic investigations provide new types of evidence for evaluating competing theories about sea peoples' movements, though technical limitations and sampling constraints continue to limit their interpretive value. Advanced dating methods, including high-precision radiocarbon analysis and Bayesian statistical modelling, have enabled more precise chronological frameworks for correlating sea peoples' activities across different regions. These techniques have revealed the rapid pace of late Bronze Age collapse events, while providing detailed temporal sequences for destruction and resettlement processes. Improved chronological precision enables better correlation of archaeological evidence with historical sources, while supporting or challenging different theoretical interpretations of sea peoples' phenomena. Isotopic analysis of human and animal remains from sea peoples' contexts provides new evidence for migration patterns and settlement processes. Strontium isotope analysis of tooth enamel can identify individuals who spent their childhood in different geographical regions, providing direct evidence for population movements that supplements pottery and architectural evidence. Oxygen isotope analysis provides additional information about geographical origins and migration patterns, while carbon and nitrogen isotope analysis of bone collagen reveals dietary information that can indicate cultural practices and economic adaptations. Underwater archaeology has contributed significant new evidence for sea peoples' activities through the excavation of shipwrecks and harbour installations that provide direct evidence for maritime capabilities and commercial activities. Recent discoveries of Bronze Age shipwrecks in the eastern Mediterranean have revealed vessel construction techniques, cargo compositions, and navigation equipment that illuminate the technological foundations for sea peoples' maritime operations. Harbour excavations at sites like Dor and other coastal centres have uncovered port facilities and associated material culture that demonstrate the commercial activities that supported sea peoples' communities. Unresolved questions about sea peoples' origins continue to generate scholarly debate despite decades of intensive research. The precise geographical origins of different sea peoples groups remain uncertain, with competing theories proposing Aegean, Anatolian, Western Mediterranean, or multiple source regions for different populations. Linguistic evidence provides tantalizing clues about possible connections to known historical peoples, but the limitations of Egyptian hieroglyphic transcription and the absence of sea peoples' texts in their own languages prevents definitive identification. The motivations driving sea peoples' activities remain similarly disputed, with different theories emphasizing economic opportunism, environmental pressures, political displacement, or combinations of multiple factors. The relationship between different sea peoples groups and the degree of coordination in their activities continues to generate competing interpretations based on different readings of archaeological and textual evidence. The role of individual agency versus collective decision-making in sea peoples' movements represents another area where evidence remains ambiguous and open to different theoretical interpretations. The ultimate fate of sea peoples' populations after their initial settlement periods raises questions about assimilation processes, cultural persistence, and long-term demographic impacts. While Philistine communities provide clear evidence for successful adaptation and cultural development, the histories of other sea peoples groups remain less well documented. Archaeological evidence suggests various outcomes, ranging from successful integration into local populations to gradual cultural assimilation that eliminated distinctive sea peoples' characteristics over successive generations. Future research directions in sea people studies will likely emphasize interdisciplinary approaches that combine traditional archaeological and textual analysis with scientific techniques and comparative studies from other historical contexts. Expanded DNA analysis of ancient remains from multiple sites and time periods may provide clearer evidence for population movements and genetic relationships between different communities. Improved paleoclimatic reconstruction could clarify the role of environmental factors in motivating sea peoples' activities and contributing to late Bronze Age collapse. Regional survey projects and systematic excavation programs at key sites continue to generate new archaeological evidence that refines understanding of sea peoples' settlement patterns and cultural development. The application of remote sensing technologies and geographic information systems enables more comprehensive analysis of settlement distributions and environmental relationships that may reveal previously unrecognized patterns in sea peoples' activities. Comparative analysis with population movements and cultural transitions from other historical periods may provide theoretical frameworks for understanding sea peoples' phenomena within broader patterns of human migration and cultural change. Studies of medieval migrations, colonial period population movements, and modern refugee situations may offer insights into the social processes and adaptive strategies that characterize sea peoples' communities during their transition from displacement to settlement. The enduring fascination with sea peoples reflects their unique position at a crucial transition point in ancient Mediterranean history. Their activities coincided with the collapse of Bronze Age civilization and the emergence of Iron Age political and cultural systems that would shape the ancient world for centuries. Understanding sea peoples' phenomena provides insights into processes of cultural change, population movement, and political transformation that remain relevant for comprehending broader patterns of historical development. The mystery surrounding their origins and the dramatic nature of their impact on established civilizations continues to capture scholarly and popular imagination, ensuring that sea peoples research will remain an active and evolving field of historical investigation. The sea peoples ultimately represent one of history's most significant examples of how displaced populations can transform from agents of destruction into creators of new civilizations. Their journey from mysterious maritime raiders to settled urban communities demonstrates remarkable human adaptability and cultural resilience. While many questions about their origins and motivations may never be definitively answered, their legacy in the archaeological record and their influence on subsequent Mediterranean development provides lasting testimony to their historical significance. The sea peoples phenomenon reminds us that periods of apparent chaos and destruction often contain the seeds of cultural innovation and renewal. As displaced populations adapt their inherited traditions to new circumstances and create distinctive forms of civilization that enrich the broader human experience.